Hey guys, welcome back to Falcons Central Radio on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. I'm one of your hosts, Aaron Freeman. I'm joined by my good friend Scott Karasik. We are back this week to talk about the Falcons' disappointing Week 13 loss to the Kansas City Chiefs. We'll also be previewing their Week 14 matchup with the Los Angeles Rams. We'll answer you guys' mailbag questions, and we'll also go over some of the roster moves that happened a couple hours ago, as we usually do starting off this show. We discussed the recent roster moves. The Falcons made a relatively small change to their roster, bringing back the great Malachi Goodwin. Basically, he replaced Cliff Matthews. They also added Kevin Graff from the practice squad, the offensive tackle from USC, who I think they signed last week or a week or two ago, to the practice squad, and he's going to be replacing center Trevin Robinson, who they signed last week as well. So, Scott, what do you think Goodman's primary role with the Falcons is going to be?
What it probably should have been had he panned out originally, that strong side defensive end, rotational 3-tech in the nickel packages, maybe even defensive end at times. I could see him playing defensive end in the base, just to help with the depth. Basically, anytime that you saw Cliff Matthews on the field this past week, you're going to see Malachi Goodman there.
Yeah, I think it looked like Matthews got most of his work as a nickel defensive tackle. I think he only played like 6 snaps against Kansas City. So I think that's probably where Goodman could potentially see a significant portion of his role. He played a lot. He spent most of the last 2 summers since Dan Quinn's coming to town playing more Leo than strong side defensive end. So I think because the team may or may not decide to get Brooks Reed more reps in the nickel pass rush as well at D end or D tackle or whatever, something that we've been talking about since Adrian Claiborne's gone out, maybe the Falcons will start mixing in Goodman a little bit at the Leo in the base defense, because I think they had Courtney Upshaw playing quite a bit there this past Sunday against the Chiefs, which is not a good thing. So we got a question about Goodman specifically from ATL Sports 404. He asked, will Malachi Goodman see any snaps for the Falcons this coming Sunday?
I'd be shocked if he didn't.
Yeah, I think he'll get a couple of snaps. It'll probably be in the single digits, but I think he'll probably get a couple of snaps right away. Okay, we got another mailbag question, and this is in reference to Groff. Smorgasborg9 asks, putting an offensive lineman on the active roster sounds like bad news for Jake Matthews. Any injury updates on him?
No, I think it's more that Groff is actually decent and Trevor Robinson's awful.
Well, I think with the news that I think the report came out yesterday that the Falcons wouldn't practice. Jake Matthews was not going to practice Wednesday, and I thought I heard that he wouldn't practice Thursday either, and they would just basically see where he is on Friday and then make a decision on Sunday. That usually tells me that he's not going to play this week. If you're basically saying, oh, yeah, there's no chance he's going to practice until Friday, and even if he did practice, it's going to be probably on a limited basis. So I think this is probably an indicator that Jake Matthews probably isn't going to play. There's a chance, I could be wrong or whatnot. I'm sure Jake is going to do everything that he can to get out there. But I think given the possible matchup this week, if he's less than 100%, just rest up. Don't get destroyed by Robert Quinn this week. It's not going to help you out. Just wait till next week and if Quinn plays, but it sounds like he's going to play. He's just coming off a concussion, so sounds like. But you never know with the concussion protocol.
Yeah, but, we could wind up not seeing Luke Kuechly later in the year because of a concussion that he suffered like 3 weeks ago. He still hasn't been cleared. Yeah, so you never know.
Yeah, Jeff Fisher said yesterday that he was optimistic that Quinn would play this week, but obviously that's not really up to him. That's up to the doctors. But yeah, I wouldn't expect Jake Matthews to play. If he does play, great. assuming that he's healthy enough to play. But I think it's probably, smarter for the Falcons to sort of rest him this week and get him ready for the stretch run and not sort of force him to be limping along next week. Because the issue is with this offensive blocking scheme, with our zone blocking scheme, it really relies on movement. And when you have a knee injury, you're not going to be able to move. You're just going to be limping along at half speed, and you're not going to be able to deal with power because you won't be able to plant and play with base. So I just think it's better in the long term, in the short term, really, if Jake Matthews sits out this week and the Falcons go ahead with either Compton or Schrader playing left tackle. Now, let's turn our attention to the Chiefs game. Not a whole lot to say. A little frustrating. Obviously, the Falcons lost the game 29-28. The Chiefs sort of basically put together the exact game I outlined last week, where got a couple of offensive scores, got some defensive scores, and got some special team scores. And their defense was good enough to keep the Falcons at bay, thanks to the turnovers. And that was enough to get that, a narrow win. The Chiefs got 16 points off of turnovers and special teams. They were the most explosive they've been all year against our defense. They got 7 plays of 20-plus yards. The Falcons only had 4. Typically this year we've been able to sort of beat other teams in terms of the explosiveness index. Who would have thought the Chiefs would have been the more explosive offense than the Falcons? And we didn't get enough pressure. We only really had that. Basically, the sack strip by Beasley was the only real pass disruption we had on Alex Smith's 26 dropbacks. A lot of quick throws, a lot of misdirection. Basically, we didn't really do anything. Alex Smith, I think, wound up having one of the better games he's had this season, 126 passer rating, completed something like 85% of his passes. So not a great defensive effort for the Falcons, despite only giving them 13 points. Talking a little bit about some of the matchups that we outlined last week in terms of the Falcons being able to go up. I think the Falcons did a reasonably good job in some of these matchups. So they certainly played well enough in a lot of areas to win this game, but a few too many mistakes on both sides of the ball sort of basically cost them. I think the running game did their job, being able to run against the Chiefs' run defense. We knew they were a little soft up front. Devontae Freeman had a really good game. We were able to keep the Chiefs' running game in check. I thought the misdirection plays, all the plays to Tyreek Hill, really sort of hurt us more than, say, that we were poor against the run. But obviously they were able to get a bunch of big plays on some of those end arounds and whatnot.
Let's put it this way. On runs to running backs, they allowed less than 2 yards a carry. They allowed 1.9 yards a carry. On runs to wide receivers and that fake punt, that's where they allowed the bulk of the yards. It's basically 4 plays. 123 yards. You take out that fake punt. You take out that D'Anthony Thomas 23-yarder. You take out those 2 runs by Tyreek Hill. And the Falcons really only allowed 26 yards on designed runs outside of that crazy – it's just frustrating. They did a good job against the run outside of the reverses. Yeah. And Tyreek Hill is just tough to guard. D'Anthony Thomas, you weren't expecting that. And then that fake punt just really killed him. I mean, I think even if you realize that it's a fake punt, even if they allow the 4th down, I still think they get a stop eventually on that drive.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's probably accurate. I do think the Falcons' offensive line held up reasonably well against the Chiefs' front. Obviously, we talked about the running game being effective. And the Chiefs' pass rush, while it was effective at times, I wouldn't say it overwhelmed us to the degree that it could have. Justin Houston had to sack and a couple other pressures. Dontari Poe had a couple other pressures. Chris Jones had a couple pressures. I don't recall D Ford really standing out from anything I remember seeing, other than that one tackle I think he had on like a end around or something like that, on a screen or something. But I would say it was a push. The Chiefs were able to, their front 7, I think, did their job in the red zone more so than elsewhere in the field. I think the Falcons really sort of ground down to a halt, and once the field got a little tight in the red zone, that's when sort of the Chiefs front seven sort of kicked into high gear with a couple of nice plays by Jones, and Jones had that pressure on the botched shovel pass to Sanu. Poe had a pressure on one of those red zone failures on third down, and obviously Houston had the sack that sort of led to a field goal as well. So, yeah. But it wasn't a total loss for the Falcons. I think there was a lot of positive performances. Mentioned Devontae Freeman. I thought Alex Mack played really well, was really getting after in the running game. I think for the most part, our offensive line did really well blocking downfield in the running game. It was just, they got beat a couple of times in pass protection. Julio Jones obviously had a big game. I thought Ricardo Allen had one of his better games. I thought Beasley had the best plays had all season with the sack strip. Unfortunately, weren't a whole lot of other plays, but I think a lot of that had to do with sort of the Chiefs' game plan in terms of the quick passing game and dink and dunk.
And he did force a bad incompletion by Alex Smith with one of his pressures after that too. But Beasley was getting chipped and taking a double almost the entire game. So I don't really feel bad about him going up against one of the best right tackles and forcing them to chip him pretty much every play.
Yeah, not all positive performances. I think Matt Ryan had a pretty good game, but obviously he had the 2 picks on the pick 2 and the pick 6 that were not good throws. I'm curious, sort of, Scott, where you sort of fall in it. Is this another classic sort of Matt Ryan played well 90% of the time, but that 10% of the time sort of just killed the Falcons?
I think he made 4 bad throws, and 2 of them just happened to be caught by Chiefs. And 2 of them just happened to be caught by Eric Berry, while Eric Berry had momentum heading downfield, and Atlanta just couldn't catch up. He's got to do a better job if the Falcons play the Chiefs again of just being like, hey, where the hell is Eric Berry? Oh, he's right there. Pay attention. Because, it's like Earl Thomas. He's got the ability to just read your eyes and know where the ball's going right away. And a guy like Eric Berry reads the film or watches the film, reads where the play is going to go, reads the look that you give, and he knows where the ball is going a good bit of the time beforehand. And that might have been Eric Berry's best game of the year, too. But it's just frustrating when you watch that and you're like, God damn it, why did they pass on the 2-point conversion knowing where they were at? And knowing how the run games fit. There were so many other plays that they could have called in that spot. I do blame Ryan for not executing. I also blame the offensive coordinator for not seeing that his run game was pushing the Chiefs around on that drive and calling a run to Devontae Freeman to close it out.
Okay.
And I don't feel like I'm being nitpicky here. Ryan had just hit Aldrick Robinson with a 5-yard passing play on a quick slant. Why not line them up wide, line up everything out wide, and then run it right up the middle?
Maybe I don't really have an issue with Shanahan's play calling.
I don't generally either, outside of that one call this week, which frustrated me. Like, call a run, call something that is not a pass, so that people don't realize, holy crap, they're gonna pass it. They're probably going to this guy. Julio's out, Sanu's out. They're going to throw it to their third receiver. So it is what it is.
Yeah. Look, I'm not arguing. I don't have a problem with putting the ball in our best player's hand in Matt Ryan. So it's one of those things where it's like it didn't work out, unfortunately. But Shanahan having confidence in his MVP caliber quarterback to throw a 2-point conversion, I'm not going to complain about it. Okay. You got anything else to add to the Chiefs game, Scott, before we want to move on to the Rams talk?
I guess for me, the only other thing that I would say that I'm frustrated with is Dan Quinn not kicking the field goal. on that 4th and 1. I know you're in the red zone. I know it feels like you're getting stopped left and right, but I don't see what harm kicking a field goal does there, because you still get the points. You still had everything else. I just get frustrated that
Yeah, I mean, I get why people are critical of that. Again, it's the same sort of situation with Shanahan calling the pass in the red zone. You know, you have the number 1 offense in the league. You've been successful on 4th and 1 67% of the time this year. Your defense is not really playing good. They've been pretty bad up to that point. And I don't have a problem with Dan Quinn being a little bit more confident in his offense, getting that 1 yard than he is with the defense getting a stop. Because if I was in his shoes, I would be more confident in that. So I get why people are critical of the move. I think it's fair to question the move. I think it's certainly the case where probably the smarter decision was kicking the field goal and taking the points at that point in the game. But, you know, I don't have a problem with Dan Quinn's gamble there. It didn't pay off for the Falcons, but, you know, I'm always going to side on the generally I'm going to side with the coach where he's going to be aggressive, because I hate sort of conservative, safe playing not to lose. And I like an aggressive coach that's going to go out there and try to win the game as opposed to try not to lose it.
I mean, and I'm the same way. I do like aggression, but at the same time, there's a couple of things that I would change. And I realize that in the moment it's a little different, but I don't know. Also, that 4th and 1 probably was a missed pass interference, but I'm not even going to get into the refs.
I mean, at this point in the season, complaining about the officials is just kind of old hat. It's just like every game you watch is just bad officiating. So it's just like, yeah, you're just going to have to accept it going into some of these games where you're just not going to get calls that are obviously there. And it's just going to be something that you just have to rise above it.
I guess for me, the thing that frustrates me is when there's an obvious face mask right in front of the ref and then they don't call it, but they call Jake Matthews on a hold when it should have been offsetting fouls. That drives me nuts.
Yeah, it's frustrating. Can't blame you. I mean, the officiating has been really bad this year and last year, you know. And we thought the replacement refs were the worst thing that ever happened to pro football. And it just seems like they secretly snuck the replacement refs from 2012 back into the league, and now they're calling games. But these are the guys that get paid the big money.
I almost want a roll call of who the replacement refs are, because I want to see if there are some of those guys sitting there in these like roles of who the real refs are. Because it wouldn't shock me if there are some guys who are replacement refs that are the actual refs right now.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about this Rams game. Now, at this point in the season, you can't really overlook any opponent. You can't get complacent, but the Rams are probably one of the better matchups for this Falcon team. They're 4-8. They've been 1-4 at home. They're starting a rookie quarterback in his 4th start, and Jared Goff has not played particularly well. I guess the biggest concern for the Falcons is sort of if they're beat up this week with key injuries to Jake Matthews. Obviously, Adrian Claiborne's out with the knee injury, but Jake Matthews is dealing with the knee injury. We talked about that earlier in the show. His status is up in the air. I'm doubtful, but we'll see. Mohamed Sanu's dealing with the groin injury. He's questionable. It sounds like he'll play this week, but I don't know at this point. We'll have to find out tomorrow when the practice report comes out. And Julio Jones is the big question with the turf toe, which is a little bit much more of a nagging injury. We got a couple of mailbag questions about whether we should sit Julio this week. Scott, you want to answer those now, or you want to go a little bit
Let's
more?
answer those now, because I got a strong opinion on this.
All right. Well, we got like 5 different people asked. Raekwon Gilbert, ATL Sports 404, Champagne Stappy. Yeah, I think that's, yeah. All those guys asked us the question, should we sit Julio this week? And some of them asked the question, should we sit him for the next 2 weeks to help him recover from the turf toe?
This may not be popular, but I'm going to say yes, you should sit Julio Jones for the next 2 weeks. Not just this week, but next week, yes. I'd even say don't even let him practice the next 2 weeks and just have him undergo treatment for the toe. turf toe is a nagging injury. You don't want to deal with it. It's not fun. Matt Ryan had to deal with a 2-week absence because he had turf toe. Season wasn't as quick. I would be perfectly fine if Julio basically sat out the next 2 weeks and then came back for the Carolina and the New Orleans game. Now, if the Falcons win the next 2 weeks, and for whatever reason the Bucs lose the next 2 weeks, Atlanta basically has the division locked up. So they would only really have to win one of those last 2 games. You could even argue that sitting Julio 3 straight weeks can work, but only if you win these next 2. I do think the Falcons can handle the Rams without Julio Jones. I think the Falcons could basically just run all over the 49ers. 49ers have the worst run defense in the league. There's really no reason to worry about having Julio out there if you can help it. And if you just want him to relax. Now, if Julio's like, I got to get out there, I got to play, I got to suit up, blah, 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 for the 49ers game, yeah, put him out there for like 10% of the snaps and just be like, dude, you're not playing every snap. You're just not. You're decoying.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. You know, I would definitely sit him this week. Next week, I'll leave it open, but probably more than likely it's not going to be just a 1-week injury with the turf toe. It is an injury that even if you sit him out these 2 weeks, he's still going to be dealing with it. It's not an injury that just recovers. Oh, in 2 weeks and you're back to 100%. This is going to be an injury that he's going to have to deal with for the rest of the season. And, you know, for those guys that aren't in the know of what turf toe it is, basically inflammation in your big toe. And it really sucks because I had it when I was in college playing soccer. And, I didn't have any sort of NFL caliber treatment on it. So I had to deal with it for 2 years. It would just randomly flare up anytime I would step wrong off of a curb or something like that. And it's just one of those things that it's hard to push off. And when you're a wide receiver like Julio Jones and, your living is made by running routes and making cuts and getting out of breaks, you need that ability to push off. And it's not going to get better. So basically it's like all the rest that he can get now is better for him, particularly if the Falcons are going to be making the playoffs. So I'm with you on that. Yeah, it's just sit him. And, if I'm Falcons, if I'm Dan Quinn, this entire week I'm going to sit here and say, oh, yeah, Julio's going to play. We feel good about it. And then come Sunday morning, he's not going to play. Because that's basically what Mike Smith did in 2014, the last time Julio didn't play against the Steelers. They were like, oh, yeah, we're optimistic that Julio's going to play. And, we'll make a game time decision, but we feel good about it. And then Sunday morning, news breaks, he's not playing, which I think they knew all along, but they just want to make the Rams have to prepare for him. So I think that's the strategy that Dan Quinn should be using this week. So I wouldn't be surprised if we hear very optimistic takes from Dan Quinn all week long in regards to Julio. And I do think Dan Quinn has to step in and say, no, Julio, you're not going to play, because we know Julio's a warrior. And he's going to want to be out there and play. As long as he can stand up, he's going to want to play. And I think it's better for him and better for this team if he can get as much rest this week as possible. All right. So let's turn our attention back to the Rams and sort of talk about why the Falcons should be able to overcome an injury to Julio Jones. Because the Falcons should be able to run the ball against the Rams, and sort of the focus of their offense this week should be the running game. The Rams are 21st in rushing yards allowed this year. They're 10th in DVOA. I think their run defense probably isn't as bad as the total yardage says it is, just because they've been playing from behind and teams basically can just.
They're also 4.3 yards per attempt. They're 24th in yards per attempt.
Yeah. I think a lot of it is they play from behind and teams can basically just run out milk clock at the end of the games. But I do think this is a team that the Falcons can run on. From what I saw on Sunday against the Chiefs, I thought Tom Compton did a pretty decent job in the run game. So I don't feel like if Jake Matthews is hurt that the Falcons are really going to lose anything there. So I do feel like, particularly with guys like Ogletree in the middle, who I don't think is really that good. And I think if you can get Alex Mack on him and get him one-on-one with Devontae in a hole, I think that's a matchup we're going to win every time. So I do feel like we can sort of just pound the ball down the Rams' throat if we can just, keep Aaron Donald from terrorizing our interior offensive line.
They basically run a nickel with a small linebacker set. Because Ogletree and Barron are their linebacker set. Their starting defense is essentially a small nickel defense. Because Mark Barron he's a linebacker, but we all know he's originally a safety. He's only about 210 pounds. He's not exactly what you want at weak side linebacker going against a team that's going to probably open up with some 13 and maybe even some 23 coverage or personnel at times. When you don't have Julio Jones, you got to put out Tevin Coleman, Devontae Freeman. You got to throw in your tight ends. You got to have everybody else step up. So I would love to see the Falcons go at them with a heavy run game and then run a lot of play action. And with the play action, go deep to guys like Austin Hooper. Utilize Taylor Gabriel. You've got Taylor Gabriel. Utilize him. Aldrick Robinson is not a bad football player. He can get open. I would even say that you can use Eric Weems a little bit in the passing offense as well. And then Justin Hardy would just have to really step up. And I think if anybody can do it, out of all these guys, it'll be Justin Hardy and Taylor Gabriel.
Absolutely. Yeah. I watched some of the Patriots-Rams game. I didn't watch the entirety of the game. I just, my eyes started bleeding trying to watch the Rams play in that game. But I noticed the Patriots were really having a lot of success attacking the edges with their run game. LeGarrette Blount was basically – they couldn't tackle him for a big portion of the game. So the Rams, they have a great defensive line, particularly when they're fully healthy. But outside that, there isn't a whole lot to really like about their defense. They're not – I'm not going to sit here and say that they're bad or anything like that, but they shouldn't be that scary to the Falcons offense, particularly our wide receivers. I think if we can establish the run, get Gabriel going on some play action stuff, use Hardy to sort of move the chains, get Hooper more involved than he's been the last couple of weeks, I don't feel like our offense should suffer too much if Julio and even Sanu are sort of limited or out of this game. So I do feel like we have enough talent to overcome those injuries against this Rams defense, even though they are a legitimately solid defense, largely because of their defensive line. But if we can win at the line of scrimmage, which has been an issue at times this year, but I'm feeling more confident coming off of this Chiefs game that we can sort of win there, that, we shouldn't have any issues with the rest of the Rams defense.
I mean, I agree. As long as they stick with the run. And I feel like with the Chiefs game, back to balanced offense, and the offense started working again. They were finally like, yeah, we're going to keep running the ball 30 times. 30 runs is a good amount of run calls. Have Tevin, have Devontae, just have them pound the ball down their throats. And you might get a couple of those breakaways that you are hoping to see from Tevin Coleman eventually. This might be the 1 week where we're like, oh man, it's going to be a rough week if Julio Jones and Sanu are out, and then for all we know, Hooper and Coleman and Devontae all bust out with explosive plays this week, and we go, oh, what? Man, that makes life so much easier.
Yeah.
Because then it makes the offense a lot tougher. Now, I will say I want to see Austin Hooper get 7 or 8 targets this week. I've got to see it because I'm tired of seeing him do nothing in the offense when I know he's got the ability to attack the seam. I know he's got the ability to be that guy over the middle. We've seen it in past games. We've seen him have the ability to do that. I want to see it happen this week. I want to see him attack Barron. I want to see him attack Ogletree right over the middle over and over again, and I think he'll be successful. But I want to see him get the ball.
Yeah, I think that's pretty fair. Let's talk a little bit about the I think probably the key matchup in this game, particularly with the Falcons offense, is in the trenches. Vienna Falcons asks, how will the Falcons stop the Rams defensive line? And, I guess, Scott, I would pose, let's say Jake Matthews doesn't play, and would you move Ryan Schrader, because Robert Quinn usually lines up on that side of the defense. Would you move Ryan Schrader over the left tackle this week, or would you just chip?
I would give Tom Compton a bag of Ruffles and give him chips all day, because you know how the Saints in the game against the Saints, we were like, man, what is Vic Beasley doing? What is he doing? They were putting a running back and chipping him literally every play. They were chipping him and Freeney literally every play because they knew they couldn't handle the rest of it.
Yeah.
So what do the Falcons need to do? They need to take a page out of the Saints handbook when Teron Armstead went down and maybe have Devontae Freeman chip Robert Quinn every down. I'm comfortable and confident that William Hayes will be stopped by Ryan Schrader. I don't think Michael Brockers is a great pass rusher. I think he's a tremendous run defender, but I don't think he's that great of a pass rusher, which is why he rotates with Dom Easley. And that's where we get to Dom Easley. Dom Easley, Aaron Donald, those are probably two of the better interior pass rushers in the league. Those are going to be a pain in the ass to deal with for the Falcons. And Atlanta may have to use either a fullback or a running back or a tight end or something to help out on the interior. Again, you hope that you hope that Andy Levitre and Chris Chester and Alex Mack can attack and can hold up against those guys. But I don't know what to tell you because they haven't really been great at handling defensive tackles this year. And I know Aaron's going to say, like, a right guard isn't the biggest issue with the offense right now. But I think if the Falcons had a right guard that could actually pass block someone one-on-one, that would open up so much in the offense.
I mean, it certainly would benefit the team. I just think, given the sort of rhetoric that Chris Chester has been awful this year, it hasn't really hurt the offense all that much. That's sort of my point.
I think it's more the Falcons just need someone who is a competent pass blocker this year. And I don't think Chris Chester has been a very good pass blocker at all. Now, as a run blocker, Chester's been tremendous. I just don't think he's been a good pass blocker. And I don't feel like I'm going crazy saying that. I feel like he's needed help more than anybody else in the past.
I think that's fair, but I also think he's had to deal with, like Ryan Schrader, he's had to deal with some really, really tough matchups. Gerald McCoy, Fletcher Cox, and Aaron Donald's probably going to be the guy he's going to be facing this week. The thing I did notice last week with New England, they basically doubled or triple teamed Aaron Donald every snap. Now, I think New England was able to get away with that because they didn't have to worry about Robert Quinn, who was out last week with a concussion. So if Quinn plays this week, I think the Falcons should probably copy the Patriots blueprint and just have Alex Mack and Chester or whatever side Donald lines up on, whether it's on the left side or right side. Basically say, Alex Mack, you have to help this guy out every single time. The problem with that –
That'd be smart.
The problem with that is then that means the other guard, probably Levitre more often than not, is going to be one-on-one against guys like Easley. It also means that it's going to open up the Falcons for twists and stunts and A-gap pressure and those sorts of things. And you don't want to be in the Falcons really haven't done a great job handling blitz throughout the season. So I don't feel like, and if I'm not mistaken, Greg Williams isn't he still in with the Rams?
He is.
So he definitely is not a guy that's shy about blitzing. So I do think that sort of goes back to why being able to run the ball is going to be a big emphasis. The Falcons need to get out to a fast start, run the football, and sort of take their pass rushers out of the equation because, even if the Falcons chip Quinn and double Donald easily, and probably not William Hayes, but the Rams can do some things that can create pressure on Matt Ryan and sort of disrupt the team. And so ideally, the Falcons could be a really balanced attack and sort of take that out of the equation. I think one of the issues that the success of the Rams over the years has usually been when their defensive line can basically assert their will on opposing offensive lines. That's where they sort of win games. That's where you see, the Rams are actually pretty good because they beat this team like Seattle or something like that. The reason why the Rams beat Seattle, I know someone asked this question in the mailbag. Smorgasbord now asked, Rams play Seattle very well in the past. Do you think that means they will have the Falcons figured out since the team is healed? No, I don't think that. I think the reason why the Rams play Seattle very well is they dominate the line of scrimmage. And basically Russell Wilson is running for his life the entire game. And when you can do that against Seattle, their offense, like most NFL offenses, are kaput. I don't.
Well, let's put it this way. I trust the Atlanta Falcons offensive line of Tom Compton, Andy Levitre, Alex Mack, Chris Chester, and Ryan Schrader, which may not, with Compton at left tackle, may not be a top 10 offensive line, but it's at least a top 15 offensive line. Even with Tom Compton at left tackle, going against Robert Quinn, it is still a top 15 offensive line over the worst offensive line in the league that Seattle has, with George Fant at left tackle, Mark Lewinsky at left guard, Justin Britt at center, who, by the way, has been improved at center, but he still fucking sucks. German Ifedi at right guard, who's their only good player on that line, and Gary Gilliam at right tackle, who blows. So they have 4 guys who are garbage, and they've got a right guard who is competent. When you're putting that against the Rams with Aaron Donald, who's a top 3 defensive player in the league, against against Dom Easley, who's one of the top inside pass rushers, against Michael Brockers, who might be one of the best run defenders in the league, against Robert Quinn, who is arguably the best weak side defensive end in the league. And then against, William Hayes isn't amazing, but I think William Hayes can create pressure against Gary Gilliam and George Fant. Yeah. So that's why the Rams compete with the Seahawks, because the Seahawks have no talent on the offensive line going against one of the best defensive lines in the NFL. And it wouldn't shock me to see the Rams somehow beat the Seahawks again this season. I don't even know if they're playing, but they're still going to beat them again at some point, because that's the way shit happens.
Yeah. I think the Falcons will do their best to sort of prevent Aaron Donald from taking over this game. I think you're going to see a lot of 2 tight end sets, a lot of max protect, a lot of sort of play action, line up Robinson, line up Gabriel out there, send them on some fly routes, and then with the 2 tight ends in, and sort of try to minimize the impact of the Rams defensive line. You don't want to get into a situation where you're playing from behind or you're getting pass heavy because you can't run the football, and it's not a good situation. So you avoid that situation, run the football, use your tight ends, use your running backs to chip, do whatever you can. Don't put Matt Ryan out there in shotgun with only 5-man protections 30 times a game. You're just going to get him killed. It's just, there's only so much you can do to throw at Aaron Donald and Robert Quinn and those guys, especially if Jake Matthews is out this week. So Falcons should be able to take care of business, but certain aspects of their offense, particularly the running game, have to show up on Sunday, and I think they will. Now, Scott, let's switch over to the other side of the ball.
I love that side of the ball.
Yeah. I've been very critical of the Falcons defense throughout the season, but the Rams offense is god awful. It is god awful. And if the Falcons defense does not dominate this game, and I'm talking Jared Goff, 112 passing yards, get sacked 4, 5, 6 times. Todd Gurley being held under 50 yards. Like, these are easy. Like, the Patriots were able to basically shut down. The Patriots defense is pretty bad.
This year it is, yeah.
They sacked Goff 4 times. I feel like Beasley should probably get 3 sacks on his own this week.
I feel like Beasley should have a good game. The Rams are one of those teams that have the literal worst, like one of the worst, third worst rushing attack, third worst passing attack, literal worst yardage offense in the league. And they have the worst scoring offense in the league. This is the worst offense in the NFL. Atlanta should fucking destroy them on defense. Rob Havenstein, he's solid as a run blocker, but he can't handle speed. Beasley should destroy him. Cody Wickman can't handle strength. This might be the game where you go, you know what? I'm going to put Hageman right next to Beasley every passing down because Wickman and Barnes can't handle strong guys pushing them back. And that's all Hageman is. I don't think Saffold's good. This is like me going over the Seahawks line again. There's one competent player and 4 pieces of trash. And one of those pieces of trash went 3rd overall in the fucking draft. In Greg Robinson. He's athletic, but he has no idea what the fuck he's doing. I have yet to see him get into a proper pass set this year.
Yeah. They're bad up front. And
they are bad up front.
Yeah. I mean, this should be a game similar to the Denver game where we see all 5 guys just getting overwhelmed snap after snap because Freeney should dominate Robinson. Grady Jarrett should dominate. Was it Tim Barnes is their center?
Oh, man. I'm just imagining Freeney spinning outside of Robinson. I'm imagining Freeney spinning inside of Robinson because he's going to do it. He will do that this week.
Yeah.
We'll be like, God damn, when did Freeney de-age 3 years?
And Beasley, as I mentioned earlier, he should dominate Havenstein. So I do feel like this is a game where Goff's going to be under a lot of pressure. The Falcons, their run defense has been competent throughout this year, other than that Philadelphia game. I don't feel like the Rams' offensive line should be able to create the holes for Gurley like Philly's offensive line was for Ryan Matthews that week. So we should be able to stop the run. We should be able to get Goff in the Rams into one-dimensional. Our offense should be able to score some points early in this game, get the Rams playing from behind, and this should be a very comfortable win for the Falcons. Basically the Falcons, if the Falcons struggle in this game, it's going to be because the Falcons, took this game for granted, overlooked this opponent, didn't show up, weren't prepared, all those sorts of things that this team really hasn't shown itself to be this season. So I don't feel any concern about that. This should be a very comfortable win for the Falcons.
I agree that it should be a comfortable win. That being said, it is the Falcons.
Yeah.
So hopefully the Falcons can get pressure with 4. Hopefully we see somebody doing well on the interior because I think that's going to be the key. I think you got to have Grady Jarrett do well, obviously. But I think we need to see something out of Babineau or the 35-year-old carcass of Babineau that gives us a flash every game.
Okay.
Again, Aaron, love Babs, love what he gave to us for the last decade, but he's done. He's cooked.
Yeah, it's fair. I don't.
It's 12 years in. Like, he's done.
Yeah.
And that's not even being rude. Like, Jonathan Babineau will always go down as one of my favorite players, and I will buy his jersey just because he fits the jersey rule from being – if you spend a decade with the damn team, you're on the jersey rule. I don't give a damn. Babineau is always going to be one of my favorite players. Just like Corey Peters was always going to be one of my favorite players. Just like Grady Jarrett will probably always be one of my favorite players because it's just fun to watch them attack. I've always been a fan of shorter, 300-pound defensive tackles that just attack every play because they know they have to. They're not that big compared to the guys on the inside. They're going against 600 pounds at times. So I'm always going to be a fan of Jonathan Babineau. And if Babineau can give us something against Roger Saffold, hell, if he's just a decoy against Roger Saffold, I feel like that'll be enough.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think this should be a very favorable matchup. This should be the most favorable matchup for the Falcons defensive line all year long. I think the Rams do have some speed at wide receiver. Kenny Britt can stretch the field. Obviously, Tavon Austin is a little jitterbug. But I think after basically seeing Tyreek Hill last week, the Falcons should be able to handle Tavon Austin, who is basically a poor man's Tyreek Hill, I guess. If that's the most – Tavon Austin isn't good. He sucks. But
Kenny Britt's not really good either. And Brian Quick is a destitute man's Mohamed Sanu. And I feel like that's the nice way of putting it. He's a possession receiver who comes in on 3 wide receiver sets and is just I mean, the one worry that I might have would be Tyler Higbee or Lance Kendricks just kind of going off on the linebackers. But even then, I don't think that they're great. I think that the Falcons have guys that can handle at least Kendricks. Higbee's a different story. And yeah, Todd Gurley is a monster. But when your offensive line doesn't fucking block for you, it doesn't matter how much of a monster you are.
Yeah, pretty much. So this should be the easiest matchup for the Falcons offense all year long. Defense, I'm sorry. Okay. All right. We got a couple of mailbag questions pertaining to this matchup. Luke asks, how is Jeff Fisher still an NFL head coach?
I think he's got a naked photo of Kroenke somewhere because that's the only logical explanation I can think of. I swear to God, I would be a better head coach than Jeff Fisher. He is probably one of the dumbest head coaches in football today. Like, when people go, I can be an NFL head coach, you go, no, you can't. Then you look at Jeff Fisher and you go, yeah, you probably could.
Yeah, I think that's a fair statement. Probably the honest answer, the realistic answer, the non-jokey answer is he's the head coach because they're moving to a new city. He's dealt with that with the Oilers, moving from Houston to Tennessee to become the Titans. He knows how to handle that. He's experienced doing it. And that's basically it. It's just the same reason why Dom Capers got the gig with the Texans in 2002 because he had experience dealing with an expansion team from his days as being the Carolina Panthers head coach. That's a thing that, for whatever reason, Stan Kroenke feels is important. Basically be the guy that guides the ship as the team sort of gets its footing in Los Angeles from St. Louis. Real reason. Or maybe Stan Kroenke's a big fan of mustaches. And Jeff Fisher does have one of the sweeter mustaches of an NFL head coach. So, okay. Champagne Sappy asks, Goff struggles to recognize the blitz. Do you think Quinn will blitz more often to exploit this?
I don't think he'll have to. I think Goff struggles against pass rush. I don't think it's the blitz specifically. Because when I was doing I watched 2 Rams games, and I saw enough to know that offensive line was terrible. And that all you had to do was get pressure, was just rush your 4 at him, and you'll win. Like, they weren't even winning, or they weren't even doing well against a bad Saints crew, a bad Jets crew, Because let's be honest, the Jets crew is not playing anywhere close this year. The Panthers were getting pressure on them all day. The Bills were getting pressure. I mean, Bills are good, but the Bills were getting pressure all day. The Bucks were getting pressure without having Noah Spence go off. I don't understand how anybody really thinks that this Rams team is good at all.
Yep.
Or this Rams team can hold up any pressure at all. They allowed 4 sacks to the Panthers. All right. They allowed 9 hits to the Jets. Against the Saints, 3 weeks ago? They allowed 8 hits and 3 sacks. These aren't good pass rushes. I would honestly say that the Falcons have a better pass rush than all 3 of the teams I just listed. Especially with Beasley and his ability to go off.
Yeah.
I don't think the Patriots have a good pass rush, and they got 4 sacks.
Here's what you guys need to know about this Rams team. No one has a lower opinion of the Falcons defense than I do. And I think the Falcons defense are going to absolutely dominate this game. So that's all you really need to know.
Yeah, this isn't like Aaron's not a homer at all. And he's just like, this Rams team is bad. Because they are.
Yeah.
Oh.
All right, Scott, you want to get into the rest of these mailbag questions?
Yeah, it's about that time, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. First one comes from Brosif929. He says, why people on Falcons Twitter try to find scapegoats?
That's the nature of being a human. Every human will try to find a scapegoat for something at some point. I mean, that's just human nature. So if you don't like people, get off Twitter.
That's a pretty good assessment right there, Scott. Yeah. It's human nature to sort of, try to blame the one thing that you feel like is, it's your boss at work, it's Donald Trump, it's Hillary Clinton, it's whatever. The one thing, if this one thing went away, all your problems would go away. It's a lie that we tell ourselves. It's not real, but it's just sort of human nature to do that. So Falcons Twitter is made up by humans, so they do it. Nick Pasqualoni asks, is a run-stuffing defensive tackle the biggest draft need?
I would say no. I think the Falcons can stop the run pretty well right now if they just play their damn gaps. The issue isn't the talent level. The issue is up here. And I think outside of the Eagles game, they did a good job. What's the biggest need on this entire defense, and I know Aaron will agree with me on this, is a 3 technique that can play pretty much every down. Basically play in the base next to Jarrett and then rotate with Jarrett in the nickel in that one spot next to Claiborne. I think that's the biggest need on this defense.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair and accurate assessment. I think deep tackle is probably one of the bigger needs on the team. If you're looking for a single position that, this is a hole on this current roster, it's probably the biggest hole in the roster right now. Courtney Upshaw and Tyson Jackson are your primary defensive tackles at this point in the season. You probably don't have a lot of talent there. I think the issue the Falcons are going to have to answer, and I think this sort of depends on who becomes available, is I do think they at least have the flexibility that if they go out and they can find a better nose tackle, they can move Grady Jarrett to that 3 technique spot and have basically two Grady Jarretts in the middle of the defense. Or they can keep Grady Jarrett in the nose and find another 3 technique. So I do feel like basically the Falcons have the option of getting the best penetrating, most disruptive D tackle that they can find this offseason, and Jarrett's ability to play either the 1 technique that knows that he currently plays primarily, or the 3 technique basically means, they're good to go regardless. Just get the guy who's the best disruptor that they can find at that spot. Run stuffing, I think they'll probably, supplement their depth with another run stuffing D tackle, but I don't think that's really sort of what they need. I think they need somebody who can go out there and play both in the base defense and in the nickel pass rush, can get pressure from the interior and also play the run in the base. So
the name that pops up that you just described to me, well, there's two really, but one of them is Abry Jones out of Jacksonville. Assuming Jonathan Hankins gets re-signed by the Giants, the Falcons need to go after Abry Jones because he has grown a ton as a player over the past 2 years. Now, outside of him, there's a bunch of guys that might be available. Dontari Poe, Benny Logan, K'Wan Short. I wouldn't put money on any of these guys actually being available, though. So outside of them, I think if you can get Nick Fairley, you get Nick Fairley.
Fair enough. Let's see. Broseph929 asks, have you guys looked at any draft prospects who is a good fit in Atlanta?
I mean, depends on what you're looking for. You want on the defensive line, there's a bunch of guys who are good Leos. There's a bunch of guys who'd be good. I mean, obviously, ideally, they somehow wind up with Jonathan Allen or Malik McDowell out of this draft. But if they can't get either of those guys, I wouldn't mind seeing Vita Vea. He's a 6'4", 320-pound defensive tackle from Washington who fits what Aaron was talking about, that guy who can play the one technique in the base and still provide pass rush. Or someone like Caleb Brantley, or someone like Adam Rapaloglu's little brother, Jake. Those would all be good fits. Off the edge, I like Derek Barnett. Obviously, if you can get Myles Garrett or Tim Williams, you get Myles Garrett or Tim Williams. But assuming that they're not going to be there when the Falcons pick, which if the Falcons make the playoffs, they won't be. I think Derek Barnett, Carl Lawson, Dwayne Smoot, you got to go with one of those three guys. I'm not a huge fan of Charles Harris. I think his hands are awful, and I don't think he's explosive enough to make up for it early on. And he's just going to need a lot of work. He is working with Chuck Smith, but I don't trust it right now. He's a big project. And then obviously Brian Cox Jr., Ryan Anderson out of Alabama, Brian Cox Jr. out of Florida, Takaris McKinley out of UCLA. I mean, there's a lot of names that I can just sit here and ramble off and be perfectly happy with them in Atlanta. Another guy who I wouldn't mind in Atlanta is Zach Cunningham out of Vanderbilt. Especially if you can get him in the second round. You want that middle linebacker, Aaron, that fits the scheme, can cover guys, can play the run well, isn't afraid to take on blocks. That's Zach Cunningham out of Vanderbilt. I've got a first-round grade on him. I don't know if anybody else really does. I'm really impressed with him. I was also one of the few guys who had a first-round grade on Bobby Wagner when Wagner was coming out. And people were like, no, man, Wagner's not that good. Cunningham is good. Cunningham reminds me a lot of Bobby Wagner coming out. He has some flaws. He's going to be scheme-specific, but I'd love to see him in Atlanta. Cornerbacks, I don't think Atlanta needs to waste time with one. I know Aaron doesn't think the Falcons need a free safety. I would love to see them go with a free safety at some point. But a Baker out of Washington, Eddie Jackson out of Alabama, Marcus May out of Florida, all those guys fit. And Aaron was talking about a dual-threat tight end that he'd love to see the Falcons have. So I'm going to appease him right now with a couple names.
Okay.
O.J. Howard, obviously. I like Jordan Leggett a lot. Leggett reminds me a lot of what Jason Witten is out in Dallas during his prime. He can block. He can catch. He's not afraid to stretch the field. He can go over the middle of the defense, take a big hit, catch the ball, and look around, look at the safety like, yeah, it didn't even hurt me. He's just got that attitude that you like seeing. If you want that more explosive kind of Aaron Hernandez type tight end, Evan Ingram out of Ole Miss is the guy. A name that's just fun is Jeremy Sprinkle out of Arkansas. He's a good tight end. He's not a great tight end, But he is a dual threat that would be fun in like the 4th or 5th round if you can get him there. And then guard, Dan Feeney, Billy Price. That's about it right now. I'm not huge on this guard class. I'd rather see a bunch of guys who you can convert from tackle as opposed to actually taking a guard. I like J.J. Dillman out of Utah a lot as a potential right guard. You'd have to take him like the 3rd or 4th round, but I like him a lot there.
Okay. I have not seen a lot of draft prospects. I've watched a couple of guys, but usually just like at this point in the year, I've only maybe seen a couple of games from a couple of guys, just where I hear people talking about a guy as a possible Falcon. I might go over to draft breakdown and watch one or two of his games just to sort of get a general impression of him. I won't really sort of dive deep into the draft until the Senior Bowl rosters are finalized, and then I'll start looking at some of the Senior Bowl guys, and then I'll start looking at some of the underclassmen after that. So it's really not going to be until January, February where I start really looking at draft prospects. And you know, hopefully the Falcons will still be playing at a certain point. So that will be pushed back if that's the case. So, yeah, I haven't really looked at anybody specific. I've seen a couple of guys that are decent players, but nobody enough for me to be like, oh, I really love this guy. Obviously Myles Garrett, but, basically you got to trade up with the Browns to get him. So that's not really going to happen. Let's see. Nick Pasqualoni asks, how concerned are y'all with Jones and Campbell versus the run? Seems like they can't take on blocks.
I mean, Campbell's hit or miss. His hands need a lot of work. And I would say the same thing with Jones. Jones just needs to bulk up. I think that freshman to sophomore offseason is going to be huge. That rookie to sophomore offseason. Jones just needs to bulk up, get to that 240-ish pounds. That was one of Wagner's issues his rookie season. He had a hard time taking on blocks in 2012. But once 13 hit, once 14 hit, he was Bobby Wagner. And that's what you needed. So I think Jones just needs to get some more ass in the pants, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, I think Jones' issue with taking on blocks is a legitimate concern. I think that part of it is him being undersized, but I don't think it's ever really going to be a strength of his, similar to sort of Sean Weatherspoon. That was not a strength of Sean Weatherspoon's at Missouri. It never really became a strength of his in the NFL. He became competent at it by the end.
I think Jones can be competent at it, is what I'm saying, though. I don't think it's one of Bobby Wagner's strengths either, if we're being 100% honest. Bobby Wagner's not going to go up and take a guard and throw him to the side. He'll take a fullback and do that. He'll take a tight end and do that. He's not going to take a guard, throw him to the side, and just destroy him. He's not going to take a guy like Alex Mack, throw him to the side, and just destroy him and then hit someone else. So,
yeah, I think in regard to Campbell, I don't think his issue is taking on blocks necessarily. I think he has the skill set and the power and the physicality to do it. I think his issue is he's slow to read things, and so he's always he doesn't attack blocks as quickly as he should because it's taking him time to process things. And so therefore he can get pushed around, or basically it allows a guard or a center or whoever on a reach block to get position against them. And when you're a 300-pound guard and you are in position and you're ready to go, there's not a whole lot of 245-pound linebackers going to do at that point. So I personally think with Campbell, I think it'll probably be better at this point to move him to strong side linebacker. That way he doesn't have to sit back and read like he does at the weak side, because I think part of the reason why the misdirection hurt us against the Chiefs, where there was a couple of those plays where Campbell was just sort of out of sorts. I think that's been a consistent theme throughout this season. I think you put him at Sam, basically in this scheme, he's going to play that outside gap, basically play contain on the run, All he has to do is, if he's lined up against a tight end or a right tackle, just jack that guy up, set the edge, and depending on if the running back cuts inside or cuts the outside, stack shed that guy and make the tackle. And I think that's something that he can do. Can he get better in terms of reading and recognizing? Yeah, but I think it's probably something that's going to be a little bit more of a slow burn than people hope. I don't think that's something that sort of you just get one season in the NFL and all of a sudden you're good at that. So I do think that's an option for the Falcons to sort of tinker with next season. If they want to give him another year at weak side linebacker, I'm fine with that. But I do think, if the Falcons can sort of tinker with adding another linebacker, a guy like Jones that's probably a little bit more physical, downhill run defender, and then, either put that guy at weak side or middle linebacker to team with Jones and then move Campbell to the strong side linebacker. I think then you could quickly go from having questions at linebacker to having one of the better linebacker cores in the NFL, because I think you would get the ideal, assuming that other linebacker, whatever potential he has, you would have 3 young linebackers that really are sort of in their ideal fits and sort of can maximize their skill sets.
And kind of going off of what you're saying, I wouldn't mind seeing him make a run at Jamie Collins. I know that, he's probably going to cost $9-10 million a year, around there. But I think if you have Jamie Collins in there, that would make a huge difference in the defense. Aaron, you're always about, hey, go get a difference maker. Get a difference maker. If Collins is available on the free agent market, it's not going to be hard to convince him to leave the Browns.
Yeah, that's true.
All right. It's not like New England's going to give him the money. So who does he go to in that case? And Atlanta, I guarantee you, if he takes a reasonable enough deal or if the money's right, will take him with open arms and pair him with Deion Jones and Devondre Campbell. Maybe Jamie Collins is that middle linebacker, and then you have Deion Jones as the weak side linebacker. And maybe Campbell sees a little bit more time with his hand in the dirt on nickel downs. Or maybe Atlanta runs a 3-3-5 on nickel downs and Campbell is standing blitzing off the edge. Who knows? But maybe that's the long-term end game here. But I do think Jamie Collins and Deion Jones as a main linebacker pairing wouldn't be a bad group in this scheme.
Yeah, I'm sort of in a similar boat. I do think Collins is going to cost a bunch of money, but I do feel like looking at some of the free agent linebackers out there, he's probably the best fit. But I'm not going to jump headlong on the Jamie Collins bandwagon quite yet, because I would at some point after the season I want to go back and watch his film, because there's been conflicting reports on sort of how good he's played. I know Pro Football Focus has graded him highly. I know after he got traded out of New England, some of the reports where he wasn't really playing up to his ability. He was lackadaisical. So
it was in practice that he was having trouble, and I think it's because Bill Belichick runs very boring practices.
Okay.
He runs very boring practices.
Yeah, so I mean, Collins is the guy that I have my eye on in terms of if the Falcons are going to spend big on a linebacker and sort of get that guy, he's probably the guy. So, once we get to, January, February, and I have time to go back and really sort of, then you might hear me do the same thing I said with Alex Mack last year, where he should be the number 1 priority in free agency or something like that. So that's something that, we'll have to see how that goes, but he is a guy that potentially could be a big fit for the Falcons at that spot. I think that pretty much answers Markel Jefferson's question about who the Falcons could get at middle linebacker, unless you had another name you wanted to add, Scott.
I mean, unless you're going to the draft, then that's where I said Zach Cunningham. Zach Cunningham could be that guy. I know not everybody loves him. I'm impressed with him. I think he's a hell of a linebacker. He does have issues taking on blocks at times, but it's not what Deion Jones has. It's like his issue is he takes on the block and he hits the wrong side of the block.
Next question comes from Nick Pasqualoni. He asks, do you think Poole's skill set would allow him to play free safety? He appears to be smart and can tackle.
I think, yeah. I definitely think so.
Yeah, I remember when we talked about him after we signed him, we talked about him sort of as a safety first before we talked about him as a quarterback, just because we sort of questioned whether he had the ideal length to play in that spot. And sort of the expectations at that point in the offseason that Jalen Collins, once he got back from suspension, would be our nickel cornerback moving forward. Obviously, Poole certainly impressed us to sort of nip that in the bud. But I do feel like I do recall saying, I think maybe we had Gina on in June after minicamp. I think I remember saying around that time that I thought you could make an argument that Brian Poole has a little bit more talent as a safety than Ricardo Allen does, just because he's a much more physical player against the run than Allen is. And I do think Poole's skill set long term is probably more as a safety than a cornerback, just because that's the lack of size, the ideal speed, the length that really doesn't quite make him a great man cover guy. But I think he's an excellent zone corner. I think he's an excellent tackler. I think he's very good when he's allowed to keep things in front of him, which is basically what the safety in this scheme is asked to do. So I feel like moving him, I think some of the issues with free safety, with people wanting to upgrade that spot, I do understand from everything I've heard that this is a really deep safety class. So I might change my mind on sort of where the safety position is on the hierarchy of team needs. But there's a couple of safeties that I fall in love with. But I do feel like for the time being, the Falcons really don't have to get a safety. They can just sort of get another nickel cornerback who can basically be the guy that is the insurance policy in case Jalen Collins isn't proven to be an adequate starter next year, can play that nickel spot, and you can move Poole back to free safety and compete with Ricardo Allen, and the best man can win in that competition. And maybe it's Poole, maybe it's Allen, and I think you're good to go.
I mean, if the idea that people have at corner is, hey, take Allen and Poole and have them compete and see who does the best, I'm okay with it, but I would rather see someone more athletic than both those guys back there. I want to see a guy who is like Malik Hooker back there. I want to see that like 6'2", 210-pound guy who has great ball recognition, who isn't afraid to hit somebody. Basically, a guy who is a more athletic version of Keanu Neal, but way better in coverage. Or basically a taller Earl Thomas.
Okay. Maybe that would describe the guy who's asked about in the next question. Luke asks, Dan Quinn described Eric Berry with grit and toughness. Is he coming back to Atlanta? His money and age scare me.
I mean, Eric Berry's been in the league for 8 years now, and he's not going to have the kind of money that you'd expect because of the whole cancer thing a couple years back. I know it's messed up to say that. He's just not. They're afraid it's going to come back. They're afraid that there's going to be something that goes on. He was a franchise tag guy this year. I don't think the Chiefs franchise him again. Now, what he'd be worth on the free agent market, you're probably looking at the same kind of deal that Eric Weddle got, especially due to his age. 5 years, $40 million. Probably that $7 million signing bonus, $8 million signing bonus around there. I think that's the kind of deal. Not the deal Weddle just signed with the Ravens, but the original deal that Weddle signed with the Chargers. I think that's the kind of deal you're looking
at. Okay. Barry's going to be 28 in a couple of weeks, so I don't think his age is that much of a concern. I mean, he should be able to play at the same level for the next 3 or so years.
If not 5.
Yeah.
Rod Woodson played until he was 40. I'm not saying Barry will play until he's 40, but I don't think Barry playing until he's like 32, 33 at the same level he's at is that out of bounds? Because he's not winning with ridiculous athleticism. He's winning with his intelligence.
Yeah, I mean, safety is one of those positions, unlike corner, where it's much more of a thinking man's position. And so you can see guys like until they lose that sort of that last step, like we saw with Ed Reed at the end of his career. You know, how old was Ed Reed when he retired?
Ed Reed was like 36.
Yeah, 36. So, yeah, so it's one of those things where Barry's longevity shouldn't be an issue. I mean, the concern is durability. He's dealt with injuries. Obviously, he had the cancer issue. That's more the concern, not his age at this point. I do think he'll probably be very pricey. I don't think the Falcons are going to sign him. I feel like he's a perfect fit for basically what Keanu Neal's role is. I don't think he's a good fit for the free safety spot. I feel like he can play it, but I think if you're going to pay a guy, and I think he'll probably make more than you think, Scott. I think he'll make probably $9-10 million a year. I don't think you're going to pay a guy that much money and then basically ask him to do something that he really hasn't been asked to do, which is to park him 20 yards downfield and ask him to play center field. I just think that's where you get bad free agent signings. Not to say that, Eric Berry's going to be a free agent bust. He's too talented to be that. But it is going to be one of those things where I think you're going to wind up getting a player that's not going to live up to the expectations. Not to the level that, say, a Jarris Bird was, but I think it's not going to be sort of the home run that people think it is going to be.
Well, that is why I would rather spend money on a defensive tackle, because I feel like you can get a defensive tackle who will be a home run. And defensive tackles last longer than the skill positions in the back. Because you don't have to be fast to be good at defensive tackle. You got to be fat and strong.
Yeah.
I mean, Babineau's just starting to wind down, and he's 35.
Yeah. Okay. Nick Pasqualoni asks, what about Beasley moving back to Leo in a few years? Maybe around his second contract.
I mean, I feel like Beasley is in the perfect role right now for his skill set. That left side end, as he gets better coming off the right side, we will probably see him move to more of a Leo role, see his snaps continue to increase, see him play a little bit more in base. But for now, keep him at that 65% snap rate. Keep him attacking off the left side in the nickel until he can get his right side handled and really learn how to rush from that side the way that he can from the left. Then do that. But for now, I wouldn't worry too much about it.
Yeah, I think, eventually moving back to the Leo is probably in the future, but I do feel like it probably is a couple of years away. I agree with Scott. I think his current role as a situational player, and by situational, I mean basically a guy that comes in the nickel, is really sort of his ideal role for the time being. I think as he gets, as he hopefully bulks up and gets stronger and continues to develop, I think then you can sort of ask him to start being more of a factor in the base defense. I think probably ideally in the short term, whether it's next year or the year after, you would like to see him be in a situation where you could put him on either side of the defensive line and be able to be an effective pass rusher. And I think that will be sort of the true test of where he's sort of reached that level as a pass rusher, where it doesn't matter that he's going up against right tackles or left tackles, he can still affect the game. I think, part of that depends on whether or not you have another guy across from him that you can comfortably put on either side of the line. Right now, you don't really have that. Freeney and Claiborne both are better rushing from the right side. So it makes perfect sense to keep Beasley on the left for the time being. But hopefully either next year or soon, the Falcons can add another edge rusher that can sort of be that interchangeable piece. And so the Falcons can just basically do what they did with Abraham at the end of his career, where they said, okay, John, which tackle do you want to face on this down? And then we'll just basically flip our defensive line to accommodate that. And that's how they used Abraham in 2012. And he was, for the most part, pretty effective at doing it. until he got hurt. And I think eventually, that's sort of Beasley's role. It's like, okay, you want to beat Greg Robinson on this player, you want to beat Rob Havenstein, and Vic makes his choice, and then he goes to work. So I think that's the goal eventually. Probably won't be the case next year unless the Falcons get a stud defensive end, which is possible. But eventually I think that's going to be where we want to be.
This is where I think the Falcons could go after. I don't think the Giants are going to keep both Jason Pierre-Paul and John Hankins. Considering how much money they invested in Snacks and Vernon, it doesn't make sense to put all of that money into big contracts on the defensive line. So if Jason Pierre-Paul becomes available, and say the Falcons miss out on Hankins because the Giants re-sign him, but they can get Avery Jones. You get Jones, you get JPP. I think those would be massive pieces to really help out the Falcons. And if you can get JPP across from Beasley, that's when you're going to see the Leo that can replace Brooks Reed and both the base and the nickel. You could have that guy who could attack. And then when Beasley does eventually become a Leo, that's when JPP is probably going to be playing in that Michael Bennett role. Or you could even just have JPP play the Michael Bennett role from the get. Because let's be honest here, JPP is way better than Michael Bennett as an athlete, as a player in general. I think he is, at least. I think for his career he is. And I think if you use him similarly, it'd be a very fun situation.
I definitely would agree with you on the athlete part. I think Bennett over the last 4 years has blown away anything that JPP has done over his career. But
JPP's been injured quite a bit of 13 and 14.
Yeah, I'm not
15, I should say.
I don't want to diss JPP because I think the last couple of years before the hand incident, he was a little underrated because he wasn't getting huge sack numbers. So I think JPP is good, but I do think, Bennett, I think, is one of the scariest pass rushers in the NFL at his peak. I don't know if JPP's really been that guy since his rookie year. But, to each their own.
Well, I hope the rest of the NFL agrees with you and the Falcons can get JPP for like $8 million a year for a 4-year deal, because I feel like that'd be perfect.
All right. Yeah, I wouldn't be against the Falcons signing JPP. It all comes down to the price tag. If he wants Olivier Vernon money, then he can go get that in Miami or something. I don't know, wherever. But
how about Jerry Hughes money? 5 years, 45.
I can handle that. Okay. Speaking of defensive line, ATL Sports 404 asks, will Brooks Reed, Tyson Jackson, or Courtney Upshaw be Falcons in 2017?
I'm going to get a little bit of hate on this one because I'm going to word it a certain way. I think they will all be part of the Atlanta Falcons 90-man roster in 2017, heading into training camp. Past that, I can't guarantee anything. But I will guarantee that those 3 guys will be on the Falcons 90-man roster heading into training camp next year.
I think Upshaw will be a Falcon next year, or at least we will re-sign him. He's a free agent. I think we will re-sign him, just because with all the roster turnover that we'll have at defensive tackle, I do think the Falcons are going to want, whether they decide to go out and get a big-time free agent or a mid-level free agent or draft somebody, they're going to want to add some bodies at the D tackle spot. And I think given what Upshaw has given them as a fill-in replacement and been okay at times, I do think they'll offer him and he'll be relatively cheap. So I think he'll probably be back. Brooks Reed, I would probably put next on that as the most likely to come back, but I do think he'll have to take a pay cut in order to do it. But I do think the Falcons sort of like him in that sort of Corey Bierman, Leo base, can do other things, maybe even play some strong side linebacker again if need be. I think they like that, having that type of player on the team, but they're not going to pay him. I think his cap hit is like $5 or $6 million next year. They're not going to pay him that he's going to have to, play at 1 or 2 million. And I think if he's open to that, and I don't feel like he's going to get a whole bunch of offers to make more than that. So I do feel like there's a pretty good chance that he'll take a pay cut and come back next year. Tyson Jackson, I would be surprised. I was surprised that we kept him this year. I just don't think that's really in the cards with sort of the expectation that the Falcons are going to want to seriously address D-tackle, having another sort of, I don't think Tyson Jackson's been horrible by any means this year. He plays his role adequately, but I think the Falcons sort of know having a 2-down, $6 million D-tackle that provides zero pressure is just sort of a waste of money at this point. You can get basically a poor man's Tyson Jackson and Hageman, assuming Hageman comes back. So it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to bring him back for 2017, despite them doing so in 2016. ATL Sports 404 asks, how long does it usually take guys to come back from the Achilles tear pertaining to Derek Shelby?
I mean, I'm not looking forward to this whole Derek Shelby is going to be no. I don't know. Normally an Achilles tear, it's either a career ender like it was with Sean Merriman, and the guy's just never the same. Or it's not as big of a deal for someone like Corey Peters, who gets over it, who's had 2, 1 in each leg, and somehow has come back and been solid, as we saw in the Arizona game. Still has flashes of his old self. You never know. I mean, it all depends on Derek Shelby. Or even Brent Grimes. Brent Grimes is another case of an Achilles tear. He ruptured his Achilles. He came back just as strong. So you never know.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I think the advice I would give is don't hold your breath because, we saw with Croy Bierman, he coming back from his Achilles tear. He basically was terrible for the first half of the season. Did kind of pick it up in the second half of 2014. Obviously not to the degree that, to earn back the fans' love and trust at that point. But it's usually an injury that typically it's sort of historically takes 18 months before a guy gets back to where he was prior to it. Some guys can come back in 12 months. Some guys can't. So it's just one of those things where some guys are able to recover from it. Like I think Cameron Wake is, having a monster season, and he tore his Achilles last year, right? So, but Cameron Wake's a freak. I wouldn't say Derek Shelby's a freak by any means. So I wouldn't be, my expectation for Derek Shelby next year is he'll come back, he'll be part of the rotation, sort of similar to how Corey Peters was in 2014. He can contribute in that role, but expecting him to play 500, 600, 700 snaps or more probably isn't in the cards. If he is able to come back and do that and play at a high level, great. That's a bonus. But I think the Falcons need to plan accordingly, assuming that, his role next year is going to be basically the same role that we see with Courtney Upshaw this year as a backup, competent backup, maybe even a good backup, but not a regular starter.
I think if he's not what he could have been, I think if he's not fully healed after this year, Atlanta's just going to move on.
Yeah, his contract is such that it's really sort of prohibitive for him to cut him this offseason. So, and giving him the chance to come back from the injury. So he should definitely be a Falcon in 2017. Beyond that, that really just sort of depends on where the team is at with their defensive line rotation and where he's at coming off of that injury.
Yeah, and it sucks because I like Derek Shelby. I thought he was a great signing. But sometimes you just have that one injury where you go, God damn, it's an Achilles. I thought things were finally starting to turn around in that Broncos game, and then he suffered that injury. And, I mean, unfortunately, that's where they're at.
Yeah. ATL Sports 404 asks, is Ben Garland now officially a defensive player?
Maybe for this season. I don't know about after that.
Yeah, I mean, probably now. I mean, technically he's still, he was still the only center they had active on Sunday, so technically he's still the backup center in case there's an injury to Alex Mack or at some point. So, hopefully he will remain a defensive player, because if he isn't, that probably means Alex Mack got hurt. So, hopefully the only time we see Ben Garland this year is at D tackle for the rest of this year. Next year we'll see. I think again that probably depends on whether or not the Falcons address the guard spot, whether or not they adequately address their D tackle spot. He'll definitely be back competing for a job, but whether that's on offense or defense, it'll determined by how the Falcons address those spots in the offseason. Markel Jefferson, we got a couple of Jalen Collins questions. First one is from Markel Jefferson. He asked thoughts about Jalen Collins moving over to free safety.
Leave him at corner. Leave him at right corner, left corner, but leave him at corner. He is doing a very good job, and I have no problems with him as the number 2 cornerback long term. I think he has been impressive. I've been very, very happy with what he's done. I know that we were all expecting a massive drop-off, but I think he is really – I think he's been a NFL average level corner during his starting time for the last couple of weeks.
That's fair. Yeah, I think moving him to safety doesn't make a lot of sense, because I just don't think that's really where he fits. Like, as we talked about with Brian Poole, safety in this scheme is more of a thinking man's position. And, no offense to Jalen Collins, I wouldn't say his football IQ seems to be the highest. So I just sort of think putting him back there, and then, he's improved as a run defender this year, but I don't really trust him fully as a run defender yet to be asking him to make open field tackles and take good angles to the ball and all that sort of thing. So no, I think at this point you leave him at corner, see what he has there. We got a couple of questions about what we sort of think about Collins going into next year. I think Collins is going to be in a position where he is going to be in a position to compete for that job, potentially to replace Robert Alford, as I've said multiple times on this show over the last several months, or over the last year plus. I don't think the Falcons are going to make a huge effort to re-sign Robert Alford. I think they're going to just go cheap at that spot, hope a guy like Jalen Collins can sort of fill in. I think he's capable of doing it. I haven't been overly impressed with his play as a starter. I think he's done an adequate job. I do think I would probably agree with Scott. He's probably been about league average starting corner. I do feel like he's still susceptible to giving up the big play. Chris Conley did beat him twice on deep balls last week. One of the time Conley dropped it. The other time Alex Smith underthrew it, and then, Jalen Collins did his patented, let me break it up with the back of my head because I don't turn and locate the ball. So I do feel like speed is going to be an issue for him, because he's really, he's a good athlete, but he's not like a great athlete. Like, he's not that great. Like, he's long, and I think those are going to be the sort of wide receiver matchups that are going to give him trouble moving forward. So, I think, playing in our division, playing against the Panthers with guys like Ginn and Philly Brown, and New Orleans with guys like Brandon Cooks, those matchups moving forward will be a little problematic for him, but hopefully, that's not too big of an issue moving forward.
I know you say Conley burned him twice, and you're right, but those were the only 2 targets on Collins all day too.
Yeah, I'm not saying that he played poorly. I just think when you're in a position where you basically, from my perspective, caught a lucky break from not giving up 2 40-yard plays, like, I can't necessarily say you're playing great football.
I don't think
I think
it's fair to say that that second one would have been a 40-yard play. It bounced off his helmet. Like, it's not like he wasn't in the right spot. He was in the right spot. He just didn't turn his damn head around.
No, but the thing is,
with the receiver,
Alex Smith, like Conley had the step on him, and Alex Smith really underthrew that ball, and that's the only reason. Like, if Alex Smith is, if he's capable of leading his receiver, if that's Ben Roethlisberger, that's a touchdown. So that's sort of what I'm saying. Like, again, I don't want to sound like I think Jalen Collins is bad or anything. I just think this is going to be an issue that is going to be, when he faces a guy like Chris Conley, who runs a sub 4.4, and, those receivers aren't quite as rare in the NFL as they used to be. Falcons got 3 of them on their team. The Chiefs have 4. So it's one of those things where it's like those types of matchups moving forward, if Collins is going to be the starter here, I think are going to be problematic for him. And, I guess that's your reason why you want a good free safety. But I don't think Ricardo Allen has been problematic in terms of giving up deep plays and protecting his guys. But
outside of the first week, I'd agree.
Yeah. So, yeah. You got anything else to add about what you think about Collins next year? Or
he's not a free safety. I do think he's going to be a solid second corner. I've been impressed with him. I think he needs to learn how to turn his head around. But he reminds me a lot of early Chris Houston, who had the same problem.
That's a good comparison.
He's a solid coverage guy. He's solid in man-to-man. He's solid in press. He's willing to get physical with the bigger guys like Michael Floyd. He held Michael Floyd to 2 catches for 31 yards. And Michael Floyd's a pretty decent receiver. I trust him this week going against Kenny Britt.
Yeah, that should be a decent matchup. Like I don't. Other than who's the Rams' third receiver? Quick. Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, there shouldn't be. He shouldn't have any problems with.
Who's their third receiver? Oh, Quick. Oh yeah, he sucks. Yeah, like that's basically what you just said.
Yeah, I think Jalen Collins should be fine this week. If he has to match up with Torrey Smith next week, that might be a matchup that he might struggle with. If Robert Alford is covering Kelvin Benjamin against Carolina and he's going to have to go up against Ted Ginn, that might be a matchup he struggles with. If he's going to have to cover Brandon Cooks.
I would trust Collins on Benjamin this year because Benjamin is just big. He's not actually good. He's just big.
Yeah.
And he just uses his body into people. He hasn't been getting separation. And I think it'd be a good matchup to where people could go, man, Collins shut down Benjamin. Interesting.
Yeah. So I think there are favorable matchups for Jalen Collins, and it'll be interesting to see how the Falcons deploy it. I think against New Orleans, putting him against Michael Thomas will probably be better than putting him against Cooks or Snead. I think you're Cooks. I think with Carolina, putting him against Benjamin should be better than or Funches or one of those guys. I think he should be better against those guys than the other ones. So Collins has potential to do well. It just really depends on the matchups. Okay, Markel Jefferson asks, Matt Ryan has dealt with red zone issues his whole career. Does Shanahan get too cute in the red zone, or does he have faith in the offensive line to get pushed at the line for the running back? These are questions.
I mean, Matt Ryan has had red zone issues throughout his entire career, but they're not as bad as people think. He's about league average in the red zone, just like everybody else. I do think Shanahan's a little bit more trusting of the running backs in the red zone this year. Freeman has 7 rushing touchdowns. Coleman has 6 rushing touchdowns. I don't think either of them, outside of that Coleman run against the Chargers and that Freeman run against the Saints, I don't think either of them has a touchdown over 10 yards outside of those 2 runs. And I don't even know if that touchdown versus the Saints was even that long. Coleman has 2 touchdown runs against the Saints, 3 touchdown runs against the Saints. Okay, so it was the Saints game that Coleman had all those touchdowns. So, yeah, Freeman doesn't have a long touchdown. Coleman has has that one long touchdown. Neither of them have the crazy long touchdowns. They both have red zone. Like, basically, all right, let me recenter. The Falcons have 12 red zone touchdowns from their running backs. I don't think they're afraid to run the ball in the red zone.
Okay.
Especially in recent weeks when they've had both.
Yeah, I think Matt Ryan does have red zone issues. I think those issues are mitigated when he has receivers that he can really trust in the red zone. I think that was a big reason why adding a guy like Austin Hooper, adding a guy like Mohamed Sanu this offseason was important. He didn't have red zone issues when he was throwing the ball to Roddy White or Tony Gonzalez in the red zone. And then we saw those guys go away or those guys retire and, become shells of themselves. And all of a sudden he start throwing red zone picks like, he's giving away candy on Halloween. I think that's not a coincidence. I do think it's a fair criticism that Ryan has not been as sharp in the red zone this season relative to how sharp he has been between the 20s, obviously because he's playing on par with an MVP at an MVP level. I don't think he's been playing at an MVP level in the red zone, but I think a lot of that has been sort of them trying to avoid those red zone turnovers, and he's playing it a little safer than he probably normally would. Which, look, I'm not going to get mad at him. I'd rather him throw an incompletion by overthrowing, Jacob Tamme by 6 yards than throwing a pick. And it's probably not a coincidence that he, threw that pick on the 2-point conversion without Julio and without Sanu in the game. So that's something that the Falcons are going to have to keep their eye on and sort of constantly keep this roster supplemented with guys that can create mismatches in the red zone. And I think that's one of the reasons why I feel like adding a tight end this offseason is a need. I think with Shanahan getting too cute in the red zone, I think that's always going to be the case with every offensive coordinator. Anytime, teams don't convert in the red zone, which has been a problem throughout Shanahan's career, not so much this year, but that's always going to be something where you overthink it and whatnot, just run the ball. I think that's a fair criticism. I don't think he has been afraid to run it. I don't think he's probably run it as much as he did last year. It seemed like they ran it a lot more in red zone last year, but I don't know if the numbers really back that up. But I don't think it's been a huge drop off. It's like last year it seemed like their run pass balance in the red zone was like 60-40, and this year it's like 50-50 or something like that. So, but
they're scoring more touchdowns in the red zone with the running backs. So whether that's, I don't know exactly what the difference is there, but they're scoring more touchdowns in the red zone. Devontae Freeman, I think the longest touchdown Freeman has on the year is 13 yards.
Yeah. I'll probably look up the numbers and tweet it after the show, just so you guys can know. On a similar note, Champagne Sappy asks, I've appreciated what Shanahan has done with our offense, but what is his fascination for Coleman? I'm assuming runs in the red zone.
Coleman's been pretty good at running the ball in the red zone. I don't understand what the problem is. Let Coleman run the ball in the red zone.
I think where he's coming, if he's coming from the place I think he is, I think Freeman is the better option in the short yardage near the goal line. So I think in terms of putting the best guy out there on the field in those situations, I think Freeman's the better running back just because of his vision and his ability to find those creases and sort of, create yards when it's not always there. I think that's a fair criticism. But I think Shanahan's been pretty clear this year that he's not going to treat either of those guys differently. They're going to rotate, that basically Freeman gets 3 snaps, Coleman gets 3 snaps. He's not going to change the offense to suit one or plug this guy in this situation. Whether you agree with that or not, it's certainly been effective this year, so you can't really say it's a bad decision. I think that's sort of why Shanahan does it. When they're in the red zone and it's Coleman's turn, he gets the carries. When it's Freeman, he gets the carries. I just think Shanahan sees those two guys as interchangeable at this point. Whether he should or not, that's another debate for another day. But I think that's the reason.
I think that's fair.
Jagger Down asks, what specifically is going wrong in the red zone when you have a new set of downs on the 2?
What do you mean? I don't see an issue with a new set of downs on the 2. I mean, if it takes you 6 downs to score a touchdown and you get the first down in the red zone, then I don't understand the issue.
I'm assuming he's referring to that series at the beginning of the second quarter on our second red zone series, like what specifically went wrong on that situation. The first down, that was the play, our friend Charles posted a GIF of it. That was the play where they tried to run the shovel pass to Sanu. Chris Jones just burst through the line and basically screwed up that play. The next play was a run to Devontae Freeman, which was a 2-yard loss, and that was basically because it might have been Jones again. I can't remember who. Maybe it was Poe. One of the guys jacked up, I think it was Levitri, and then Tamba Hali, it clogged up the run because I think Toilolo didn't hit his block on Holly, and they dropped Freeman for a loss. And then the third down was Ryan threw a pass to Hardy and Poe. I think that was the play where Poe put a nasty swim move on Chris Chester and got pressure on Ryan, and Ryan didn't throw a great pass to Hardy, and that was it. Like, that's what happened. We didn't execute. Not necessarily. Yeah. I don't think it was because, play calling or anything like that. You can probably disagree with the shovel pass or whatever, but other than that, I think it was just our guys up front didn't do their job.
I mean, there's no other way to say that.
Ryan O'Brien asked, for the love of Christ, can the Falcons utilize Julio in the red zone? I just don't understand why he isn't an option.
We're on the same page. Julio doesn't have a single red zone, or he's got that one red zone touchdown this year. Honestly, I would much rather see Julio get a target, but you got to have him open. If teams are going to say, oh, hey, look, it's Julio Jones and it's the red zone, let's double team him and add a safety. Take who's open. A lot of times Julio is just not open because he's being triple covered or double covered. So give it to someone else. Would you rather have – so here's my example. Atlanta goes against Green Bay. There's that pass to Mohamed Sanu in the end zone. Julio Jones has double coverage on the outside, gets open a little bit later. Would you rather have Ryan hold on to the ball, trying to force it to Julio? Would you rather have Ryan hit a wide open Mohamed Sanu going against a linebacker right over the middle? Take what the defense gives you in the red zone. You have to.
Yeah. Yeah, I think everybody's frustrated with Julio's lack of usage in the red zone. I think part of that is by design because, we saw famously against the Packers where they basically put 2 guys out there and the Falcons were able to just go and score pretty easily. He draws so much attention that it opens up opportunities for other guys. And when our other players have been as effective as they've been this year, those are opportunities that you want to exploit. I do think the Falcons probably should design more plays for Julio in the red zone. But it's kind of a situation where it's like, yeah, you want to see him get more usage, but at the same time, they don't need to force feed him in the red zone and make themselves one-dimensional in terms of what teams can expect from them. So, that's something that the Falcons need to work on, but I don't think it's holding them back too much at this current point. Okay, Champagne Sappy asks, with our terrible defense, wouldn't it be wise to emphasize the run game? We seem to get away from it as of recently.
Yeah. Run the ball, milk the clock, make sure that you've got the best possible players out there on the field at all times, and right now that's the offense. I mean, they milked the clock. They got 33 minutes or so of time of possession against the Chiefs. The issue right now isn't that the Falcons' offense isn't doing what it should be doing to protect the defense. The issue is that the offense isn't really executing in the red zone the way that they have been earlier in the season. Now, this is nitpicking because they still scored 28 points, but I'd like to see them score 35 points next time.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to some of these recent games, like I just blanked on it. Tampa Bay and Arizona. You go back and you go and look at the third quarters of those games. They did commit to the run. They were very effective at controlling the ball in the second half, particularly in the third quarters of both of those games. And I think it was a big reason why the defense looked reasonably well. They got it, I think against Tampa Bay, they got like a 3-and-out, and they had like two defensive series, and I think maybe Tampa Bay only ran like 7 offensive plays on those 2 series combined in that week. And I think it's one of those things that the Falcons are trying to make an effort to do, but at the same time, they're not going to be, when you have our passing game, when you have our quarterback, when you have Julio Jones, when you have our bevy of weapons, you're not just going to simply, we're just going to run it on first down, we're going to run it on second down, and we're going to throw it on third down. Like, they don't want to get predictable. And now, this week with the injuries to Julio, with the injuries to Sanu, I think you're going to see a lot more emphasis on the running game. You're going to see a lot more of probably a conservative game plan in the sense of how much they run the ball versus pass. I'm sure Shanahan will design a lot of plays that are designed to sort of be a little bit more exotic in the passing game to sort of mask maybe the potential absence or the fact that Sanu or Julio is a decoy this week. So I think that's something to keep an eye on. But I don't think not running the ball has been that big an issue. It's gotten out of hand at times when the Falcons have sort of been chasing the lead in the second half of some of these games. But I think for the most part, Shanahan's done a very good job keeping us balanced this year. Markel Jefferson asks, should we hire Gus Bradley when he's fired from the Jaguars because he knows the scheme in and out?
Yes, he should be replacing our good friend Jerome Henderson as the defensive passing game coordinator.
Okay.
I don't think Richard Smith is the reason why the defense is bad. I think the defense is bad because it beats talent. I also just don't think Jerome Henderson really knows what he's doing. I don't think that the secondary has been – I think the secondary is really run by Marquand Manuel. And I think if you had a guy like Gus Bradley, he could help get the linebackers figured out for coverage. Because right now the linebackers don't know what they're doing in coverage. And Henderson is a defensive backs coach, not a linebackers coach. So I think if you had Bradley in here, he and Ulbrich working together, I think that'd be the way to go.
Yeah, look, if the Falcons wind up hiring Gus Bradley to be an assistant coach, I don't got no problem with that. Is he the missing piece to the Falcons defense being good? Not really. I mean, based off of the evidence of Jacksonville's defense basically being terrible for 4 years, no. So it's one of those things like if they hire him, great. If they don't, whatever. I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference. So, no. Whatever. Jagger Downs' question is, how does Josh Perkins earn more of a look?
He earns it by practicing hard and working his ass off for it. I mean, I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah. I think we'll probably see a little bit more Josh Perkins this week just because I think the Falcons will try to, as I mentioned when we talked about the Rams, use a little bit more max protect and 2 tight ends to try to help the offensive line out against the Rams defensive line. And so that probably will give Perkins a couple of reps here and there to sub in for a Hooper or Toilolo if those guys get tired. But I think at this point, everybody's favorite backup tight end, Levine Toilolo, has played pretty well these last couple of weeks. Blocking has been, up and down at times when he's, blocking someone like Justin Houston. But for the most part, I think his blocking has been pretty good. Hooper hasn't really made an impact in the passing game to the degree that we want. But I think we all agree the arrow is still pointing up for him, and he just maybe needs more reps and more opportunities to get into the mix. And I think with Perkins at this point, you just sort of you get him some opportunities here or there, and hopefully he takes advantage of them, which he hasn't done to date. And you're developing him for next year, not really this year.
I think that's fair to say, because the only two tight ends that are even under contract right now for next season are Austin Hooper and Josh Perkins. And I don't know how likely it is that we see Levine Toilolo come back next year, unless he takes a really cheap contract.
Yeah, I think there's a decent possibility that happens. I just don't see, teams going, oh, we got to get that Levine Toilolo, and we got to pay him good money to be Levine Toilolo. So I do think the Falcons should be able to get him at a modest contract should they want to re-sign him. Now, I think that's probably a bigger question than whether or not they will be able to. But we'll see how that goes. ATL Sports 404 asks, what would be more valuable to the Falcons, adding another tight end or another receiver?
Tight end. I think at receiver, between Justin Hardy, Mohamed Sanu, Taylor Gabriel, of course, Julio Jones. And then, you got Devin Fuller, you got J.D. McKissick. And bring back Aldrick Robinson. Is there really a need to draft a guy at this point?
No, there isn't.
I think you've got enough talent between those guys. Maybe even add in, bring back Weems, bring back Nick Williams, just have those guys for camp at least. I mean, I don't even really know if there's a spot on the roster, on the 90-man camp roster, for more than like 3 or 4 receivers, which is a good spot to be in. And even then, I don't know if they really bring in more than 2, because last year they only really had 10 or 11 guys, and they wound up keeping 9 of them.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think tight end is the more valuable position. I think Scott's right. Wide receiver, you're pretty much good.
Wait, say that again? Say that again?
I think Scott's right.
Sorry, I don't say that often.
It's true. It's not something that comes out of my mouth very often. I think with wide, Aldrick Robinson's a free agent. I think Weems is a free agent. Nick Williams is on the practice squad, and basically they just have to say, here's the veteran minimum to come back, so they can literally just throw that money away. So really, they only really stand to lose 2 wide receivers, and they're going to bring back Fuller, McKissick, Williams. Gabriel's a restricted free agent, so he should be able to come back. Hardy, Sanu, Julio Jones. They don't really need a wide receiver. Basically, the only reason for the Falcons to really sort of look at a wide receiver is if some really talented wide receiver falls in the draft or something like that, who can be sort of another speed guy that can also return. Basically, you want a Tyreek Hill or somebody like that to slip into the late rounds, and you're like, oh, well, we can't pass up on this guy who runs a 4.2 who can also return kicks.
Basically, if Corey Davis becomes available or D.D. Westbrook becomes available, you take him. Otherwise, you don't need a wide receiver.
Yeah. So
kind of like if Amari Cooper was there at 8 and Vic Beasley wasn't available, you take Amari Cooper, because the concept of having Amari Cooper and Julio Jones across from each other is kind of insane.
Yeah. I mean, basically, you're basically like, this guy is so talented. Why is he falling on this board? Basically like a Dez Bryant 2.0 situation where, a guy who's a little less of a knucklehead than Dez is, but basically this guy is like a top 10 talent and he falls into the late first round, and we can't pass this up. That's really the only situation. That's probably not going to happen. I think tight end is the more valuable of the positions. I think that does more for your offense. I think you know the ideal situation is you're going to add a dual threat tight end that can be both effective in the passing game and as a blocker, so that the Falcons can sort of basically borrow a page from the Patriots playbook, which has, I think, been the key reason why the Patriots offense has been so potent over the last like 5-6 years, is because of their usage of the two tight end sets with Gronk and Hernandez and now with Bennett, where they're able basically to run their entire offense with two tight end sets, and there's really nothing you can do to stop them, just because of the quality of their tight ends, where it's like if you put your nickel coverage out there to sort of deal with Gronk and Bennett and those guys in coverage because you're afraid of what they can do in the passing game, guess what? They're going to run the ball down your throat. And if you put linebackers out there to sort of deal with the run game, then guess what? They're not going to be able to match up one-on-one in coverage. It's just really an impossible spot for defenses to be put in. And the only thing that really can stop the Patriots offense is getting pressure on Tom Brady. We saw Denver do that last year. We've seen other teams like Baltimore have some success doing it in previous years. And I think that's sort of what you want the Falcons offense under Shanahan to potentially grow into. We've seen him be very effective using 2 and 3 tight ends this year. I think adding to that, getting better at that position as Hooper continues to grow and be a part of that, getting better, more athletic. You know, basically you want a guy, ideally you want a guy that's as good or better a receiver as Jacob Tamme and as good or better a blocker as Levine Toilolo. And combine that guy into one guy, put him with Hooper, and your offense is potentially unstoppable if both of those guys live up to their potential and, you know, can create mismatches on the outside.
Pretty much. I mean, there's nothing that Aaron's saying that I'm disagreeing with right now. A two tight end set where you basically have a mini version of, we'll say, a four-man Travis Kelce and Austin Hooper. And if you can get a Witten or, I mean, ideally you get a guy like OJ Howard, but you don't want to take that guy in the first round. Or Bucky Hodges would be great, but you really don't want to take that guy in the first round because Bucky Hodges to me is very similar to Gronk, and I feel like you could use Hooper in that Hernandez-ish type role. But you could run a lot of ace, a lot of 12 personnel, and do really well.
Yep. Speaking of which, Andrew Schauweiler asks, Aaron, you were talking about getting another tight end for next year. Who are you looking to get? Ideally, you would just go out and sign Martellus Bennett, and you just basically, you know, you're good to go right there. Because that's basically the type of player. Bennett's a good blocker, also a difference maker in the passing game, and a very good red zone target. So he checks all 3 boxes that you want. You know, I don't know how possible that's going to be. I know given the injury to Gronk, the Patriots – reports are that the Patriots have prioritized keeping Bennett for next year. I saw that a report that said he turned down a $7 million a year contract, so he's not going to be cheap. So it's going to be a bidding war, or maybe whatever it is. No tight end on the free agent market that I've seen that I would be like, oh yeah, plan B is to get that guy. There's a couple of guys that are decent players. But it's a really good tight end draft class. And as Scott said, I wouldn't be thrilled if the Falcons use the number 1 pick on a tight end, but basically, there's probably 5 or 6 at least day 1, day 2 caliber tight ends in this draft class, and basically just wait around to the end of the second round, assuming the Falcons are picking there, and just take whoever's the best available at that point, and you'll probably be good to go, and you'll be very happy. So I think that's probably, if you guys want a specific name at this point, I like OJ Howard. I like Jake Butt.
You like Butt?
Yeah. I like Jordan. I mean, I haven't really watched those guys this year, but from what I saw last year, Leggett, Evan Ingram, all those guys, Ingram's probably more of a receiver than a blocker, but he could be a really good receiver. So, I'll take a Jordan Reed type of receiver if the guy can't be a great blocker. So
So I just went through all the touchdowns that the Falcons have had this year. On their 14 touchdowns from their running backs and their 14 running touchdowns, 13 of them are in the red zone. Of their passing touchdowns, 14 of them are in the red zone. So that's about as even as you can get. What's nice is Atlanta has another 13 touchdowns that are 20-plus yards. And of those, 5 are 40-plus yards.
Okay. All right, there you go. Hope that answers, was it Markel's question, whoever it was?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay, all right, Shedrick Carter asks, I'm sorry, how do you have the remainder of the season playing out?
I mean, what do you want me to say? The Falcons win out? They can. I mean, legitimately, they can win out. They can beat the Rams. They can beat the Niners. They've already beat the Panthers and Saints. Ideally, they win out. If everything goes right, they win out. How do I see it playing out? I don't know, man. This team is the most unpredictable team I've ever watched. There's like 4 games here that I was like, man, they're going to get crushed. And they won, and they destroyed the team. And then there's 4 games where I was like, man, they're going to win, and they lost. Week 1 versus the Bucs, thought they were going to win, they lost. They were going to get crushed, they won. Like, against the Panthers, thought they were going to get crushed, they destroyed them. Against the Broncos, I thought it was going to be the Broncos winning, Atlanta won. Against the Seahawks, I didn't even think Atlanta was going to compete in that game. So the fact that they competed was beautiful to see. I thought they were going to beat the Chargers, and for the first half of the game, they destroyed them. And then they fell apart. I thought they were going to beat the Eagles. They fell apart. I thought they were going to beat the Chiefs, and they fell apart. So there's probably 3 games on their schedule right now that they should have won that they didn't. That they probably would have won with a better defense. So right now, we need the defense to stand up for me to even consider saying that the Falcons are going to win out. And they've got to stand up over the next 2 weeks and just dominate the Rams and the 49ers for me to be like, yeah, they're going to beat the Panthers and the Saints as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I would guess, I've sort of thought going into the bye week that we would probably finish 4-2. We would probably lose one of those games to the Cardinals or the Chiefs, and we'd probably lose one of those last 2 division games, So I sort of feel like that's probably going to be how it plays out. We'll probably finish 10-6. I think we're certainly capable of, running the table here on. I think the injuries to Julio and Jake and those guys, if those injuries tend to linger, these things can start to mount up, and maybe we get caught by the Panthers or the Saints. Particularly, I think the Panthers defense, even though they did not look at the other night, I think, assuming Kuechly is back at that point, they will probably be a tough matchup for us just because, most of the struggles we've had this year have been against teams with competent defenses that can slow down our offense. And, with Julio Jones's turf toe injury might still being an issue, I don't expect him to go for 200 yards in that game like he did in week 4. So, I think the Panthers probably would be a reasonably tough outing for us, at least tougher than it was a couple months ago. And I think the Saints, they can score points against this defense. Like, unless this defense starts playing much better, I expect that game to be like a 45-42 game. So, in that sort of situation, if you're just going to give up, 500 total yards to the Saints offense, then the Falcons could easily lose that game. So I think, those are the 2 tougher matchups. I would be very disappointed if the Falcons drop either of these next 2 games. That would be very concerning to me. But I think they'll be fine and probably 3-1 or 4-0.
Hopefully they're 4-0. That way both Aaron and I can be like, we were wrong in our predictions in the best way possible.
Yeah.
And hopefully Because if they go 4-0, they'll be 11-5. They'll win the division. Everybody here is going to be very happy. Everybody with the Falcons, everybody in the Falcons fans are going to be very happy. I just don't. I need to see them beat the hell out of the Rams. I need to see them beat the hell out of the 49ers. If they do that, when they do that, I'll be happy. I want to see Devontae Freeman go off for like 150 yards this week and have Tevin Coleman also go off for 100 yards. And people go, holy crap, when do the Falcons have a running game that is this good? I want to see him do the same against the 49ers because the 49ers' run defense is the worst in the NFL. And then I want to see him take it to the Panthers and close the dome out against the Saints with a great win. Because if they don't beat the Saints in the final game, I'll be very pissed off.
Yep. That won't feel good. Yeah, I think with this week's game, like I think the Falcons need to start playing like a playoff team. And the Rams are an easy matchup for them. They are not a playoff the Chiefs are legitimately a playoff caliber team. The Falcons played a close game, but they didn't play great in that game. They were able to basically, I think the Chiefs clearly outplayed them in that game. It's one of those things where they need to start playing like a playoff team. Against a weak Rams team this week, they should dominate this game and blow this team out. If we wind up winning like a 17-14 game, that's going to be troubling. Because it's like, even though we're beat up, you're getting down the home stretch, and you need to be able to – we should be able to survive a Julio Jones injury. We should be able to survive a Jake Matthews injury, a Desmond Trufant injury. That wasn't the case in previous years, but the way this team has played this year, we should be able to handle those against a bad Rams team. Now, if we were dealing with these injuries against the Chiefs, yeah, that would be a different story. But against a bad Rams team, we shouldn't have that much trouble.
I agree. I think if the Falcons do anything less than – if the Falcons win 24-7 this week, I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Like, they don't have to blow them out. I understand that losing Julio is going to hurt the offense a little bit. But if you don't score at least 24 against these Rams, you're screwing up somewhere. And if you don't hold them to – they're the worst scoring offense in the league. If you don't hold them to at most 15, which is what they're averaging, I don't know what to tell you. Like, if the Falcons win this one 33-15, which is what the scoring offenses do, everybody here is going to be happy and think it's a good fit. I would just rather see the Falcons win like 45-0, and people go, "Holy shit, Atlanta's getting hot," and then the next week win 45-0, and then the next week win 45-0, going into the playoffs. Because I think if you do that going into the playoffs, that's getting hot at the right time. That's your defense finally starting to click a little bit and say, you know what? Maybe we don't suck. Maybe we finally do have the confidence to go against good offensive teams like Dallas. Because I do think a lot of what the issue is with the linebackers, it's not 100% that they're making bad reads. It's that they're not trusting themselves to make good reads. And I think you have to play some shitty teams like the Rams and the 49ers and the Panthers to make those reads and to make those good reads to have a shot.
Got one from Andrew Shawwaller. He asks, should the Falcons try to upgrade both guard spots?
This offseason, no. I do think one of the guard spots is going to be upgraded long term. I think left guard is eventually going to be Wes Schweitzer long term. I don't think right now it's Wes Schweitzer. I think he's another year away from starting, which is perfectly fine. Now, as far as right guard, that's going to be changed this next year. No questions asked. that Chris Chester is what, 35 years old. He looks like he's 35 years old, and he's just not holding up like he could be. And I think if there's anybody who can replace him, there's a bunch of guys in free agency that can replace him. You got Kevin Zeitler, you got Ronald Leary. Either one of those guys would be perfect fits at right guard. You've got a bunch of guys in free agency that are almost as good. You've got a couple guys in the draft who are pretty good. And you got a bunch of guys who are solid tackles who just I don't think project well in the NFL as tackles. I don't think they're quick enough to play outside. I think they're more inside guys. And I think that's where you can get away with having them is at right guard, going against the more powerful players. So I think there's the talent there to replace Chester. I think Levitre's fine for now. I think as a run blocker, Levitre's been way better this year than he was in 2015. He looks like the guy he was in Buffalo again, who still struggled with some pass rushing, but does a very good job of pushing guys down the field, creating lanes, and doing everything he needs to do.
Yeah. I think I would doubt that the Falcons will try to upgrade both spots. I do think there's a chance they do, but I think unless basically Levitre falls completely apart the rest of the season, I think he'll probably be reasonably safe to return next year as the starting left guard. I do think it's very likely that the Falcons will try to replace Chris Chester. I do think there's a good chance that they basically pencil in Wes Schweitzer into that spot and then sort of play a wait-and-see game instead of going attacking in free agency and seeing, who's available in the middle rounds of the draft and just add another young guy that sort of they can push Schweitzer and maybe be developed as Levitre's replacement in 2018 or something like that. I don't think it's going to be a huge priority for the Falcons moving forward. I do think it's going to be an interesting offseason at that spot in free agency, though, because everything I've heard is that this is a bad offensive line class, and this is a really good free agent class, particularly for the guards. You have guys like Leary, Zeitler, TJ Lang. So I do think that's probably going to drive up the price of some of these free agents and get some of these guys paid. A bunch of Sam Baker contracts being handed out to legitimately good offensive linemen, albeit, but you're going to have to pay $30 or $40 million over that mark to get some of these guys. And I don't necessarily know if the Falcons are going to be in the market for that unless we get into the playoffs and we're sitting here saying, "Oh, we lost this game because," I'm trying to think of who's a good D tackle that will play in the postseason potentially. Damon Harrison dominated the game. I don't know, something like that. So I don't really see that sort of scenario playing out. So I don't feel like it's going to be a huge priority for the Falcons, but I do think we'll see at least one major addition at the guard spot with Schweitzer, if not outright replace Chester.
I do think there's a couple names that could be outside shots. Guys like Jonathan Cooper and Luke Jekyll are both going to be free agents. Jekyll wasn't good at tackle, but I do think he was solid at guard for the couple of games he played there. If he can stay healthy, he might be worth it at right guard. Cooper, I don't know what his deal is. I don't even know if he'd be worth it. He's touring around in Cleveland right now. Could always steal Tim Lelito from the Saints. They're not going to franchise him. He's not that good, but he's better than what Chris Chester has been. Outside of that, guard, I would pay more for a competent guard because I don't think at tight end there's that guy that you can really say, oh, hey, you got to go get him in this free agent class. The best tight ends in this free agent class are Martellus Bennett, Vernon Davis, and then Jack Doyle. Like, that's your top three. Tammy's up there, but, I don't think Tammy would be expensive to keep. Toy Lolo's up there. I don't really think Toy Lolo would be that expensive to keep. And when that's your best group in the tight end class this year, you're not talking about a lot of good talent. And the talent that is there is old. So outside of Jack Doyle, who's 26, I don't think you're going to see a tight end get a big contract. I don't even think Jack Doyle is going to get that big of a contract.
Jagger Down asks, you exacted how the Chiefs would find a way to win last week, referring to this guy. What about the Rams this week? I guess if we're, painting this horrible, where everything just goes wrong for the Falcons, Aaron Donald dominates this game. Chris Chester is basically left for dead on the field. He doesn't even get back on the plane to Atlanta. That's how bad Aaron Donald treats him, which is possible if they, one-on-one him, which I hope Shanahan's not dumb enough to do. Robert
Unless
Quinn.
It's the run game, then don't do it.
Robert Quinn dominates Compton. The Falcons try to run the ball, and for whatever reason, they just don't have it on the game, probably because Donald is just living in the Falcons' backfield. They get behind early in the game. Matt Ryan, a couple of fumbles, couple of interceptions. For whatever reason, Kenny Britt beats our defense, makes our defense look even worse than I think it is. Todd Gurley just is running over guys. I don't see this scenario really being likely, but I get it's just one of those games where the Falcons just don't show up. Like that's the only really scenario I could see happening where the Rams win this game, where it's a really sloppy, ugly game for the Falcons. They just, whatever reason, Matt Ryan plays super jittery because he doesn't have Julio, he doesn't have Sanu, he doesn't have Jake Matthews, and he's just out there looking like the worst version of Matt Ryan that we have. Tevin Coleman's fumble problems come back, just basically the worst possible game that you can imagine for the Falcons. That's the only way I sort of see them losing to the Rams. So, I don't see that happening because that's how much confidence I have. Now, I had the same amount of confidence going into the Sam Gatto game from 2005. So, you never know with the Falcons, but I don't feel like it should be an issue. We got a couple of questions, but they're more like comments from Markel Jefferson. I'll just read them. And if, Scott, you feel like any of these are worth answering, I'll let you jump in at any point. His first one is more of a comment. He says, you should think about doing a video segment of breaking down film. That would be nice on the podcast.
I would love to be able to do that. I don't have the technology to do that.
I think there's also copyright laws, too, that sort of prevent that from happening.
Oh, yeah, we would totally be in jail.
Yeah, so I think YouTube would shut us down. The NFL would shut us down. Someone eventually. Now, we probably could get one show off maybe before we got shut down, but eventually we'd probably get shut down.
Let me put it this way: if you want to see a guy break down film, I think DJ Shockley does a great job of doing it. If anybody can do it, that makes it as simple to understand for everybody to watch, it's him. It is easy to understand what he's saying. He breaks it down. He breaks down the concept behind the play probably better than anybody else.
Yep. And if you guys, I'll shout out my boy Alan Stirk. He does the All 22 GIF reviews on Tuesday night. He's posting right now. If you guys follow him on Twitter, Alan_Stirk. It's not detailed breakdowns like DJ Shockley, but you get to see what the film looks like, and he'll usually give a pretty good blurb in 140 characters on what's going on in that given play. So it's always a good follow. Yeah. And next comment from Markel Jefferson: we have to see Dan Quinn growth as well because he is just a second-year coach. I just hope he doesn't cost us in the playoffs. Sure. Next thing.
I agree. Dan Quinn has to grow as a coach just because everybody has to grow. But, maybe Dan Quinn growing as a coach is next time the Falcons play, I don't know, the Seahawks, they do what was working for them in the second half more. Or the defense learns how to shut down that final pass, or Alford doesn't get called for pass interference right at the end, setting up that short-ass touchdown. So maybe that's Dan Quinn's growth there.
Next comment is, Alex Mack is a great center. Do you guys remember the Matt Ryan Houdini play? We need more guys like that on our line.
Alex Mack is arguably a top 4 center in the league. I would say Ryan Schrader is arguably a top 8, 5 to 8 right tackle right now. I'd say Jake Matthews is fringe top 10 at left tackle. So you're really looking at the guards. I mean, Andy Levitre is probably right there on the fringe top 10 left guard this year. Whether you want to agree with it or not, I think that's how he's been playing. So really it's just Chris Chester, who's been league average at right tackle. Chris Chester hasn't been bad at right tackle. Now he's been bad in pass protection, but as a run blocker, I think he's been tremendous. I think he's been very fun to watch. I think he goes out there, he's like a heat-seeking missile, especially in the zone scheme. He blocks his guy or he chips his guy, and then he goes and he finds a linebacker. So I think Chester's been excellent. I think the problem that we have is we focus too much on pass blocking and we ignore run blocking when it comes to these guys.
It's a fair statement. I agree with that, Scott. I'm not as down as Chester as you are. I do think your general sentiment is right. I think he's been excellent in the run game. I think a lot of that is owed to sort of Alex Mack being the stability in the middle, being able to reliably hit his assignments, which was very hit and miss with Person last year. I think Chester has been able to maximize his run blocking ability. That's always been sort of the strength of his game. He's always struggled against top-tier defensive tackles. I don't think he's been as bad in pass protection, but I do think, when he's faced really good defensive tackles, which has been a regular issue throughout his career, back in his prime in Washington when he would go against Justin Tuck, he would get abused. He's played Gerald McCoy. He's played Michael Bennett. He's played Dontari Poe. He's played Chris Jones. He's played Fletcher Cox this year. He's gone against a really talented group of pass rushers. They have made him look bad. I don't necessarily blame him that much because I think that's sort of been his MO throughout his career. So it's not as if I expected him to go up against a Fletcher Cox or a Dontari Poe and handle that guy. I'm not as down on Chester, but I understand why people are down on him. He is replaceable, but I also think he doesn't, and Scott gave him the credit that I think he deserves. But I think by and large, a lot of people out there haven't been giving him as much credit as effective as he's been as a run blocker this year.
Honestly, the only reason why I think the Falcons should have right guard as one of the top needs is because I think in pass protection you need that. And I think if you get a guy who can do everything that Chester does as a run blocker but can also pass protect, that makes the line that much better. That puts Atlanta's line then up there with the Dallas and the who's the other one? The Dallases and the Oaklands of the world. I would say Atlanta would probably have pretty much the third or fourth best offensive line behind those guys and maybe the Titans.
Yeah. Okay. Last comment / question from Markel is, I can't wait to see the response of this team in the playoffs. We'll show – sorry. Grammar is not my strong suit. I can't wait to see the response of this team in the playoffs will show who they are really as men. I still love the fight this team has shown in all the games this season since week 1.
I think that's fair to say. I don't know. I'd love to see this team really fight hard in the playoffs, but I'd also like to see them win in the playoffs. So I don't know. Give me a win. Put them in the NFC Championship game even. I think the season's successful just by making the playoffs, just by going 10-6. But if they can obviously go 11-5, win 2 games in the playoffs, make it to the NFC Championship game, they're a year ahead of schedule, especially against the schedule. They have taken the schedule compared to what I thought they were going to do to it and kicked its ass. They're 2 games ahead of where I thought they'd be at this point. I mean, I pretty much picked them to win the last 4 starting the season now, but they're a couple games ahead of where I thought they'd be at this point. So they're doing well.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember what I had them at this point, but I basically had them struggling early in the first half of the season and sort of just rallying wins to get to 8-8 at the end of the season. So probably at this point, I probably had them with like 5 wins at most. So the fact that they have 7, obviously I think they're doing good. I'm very much looking forward to, assuming that we do make the playoffs, which I'm optimistic that we will. I'm very much looking forward to see what team shows up in the postseason. I do think, while I don't look at the Falcons and say, oh, this is a great football team, because I do think defense really sort of matters in the postseason. And given how our defense has played this year, I don't have a lot of confidence in them stopping any one of these offenses that we might face. I do feel like this is a pretty soft year. I think that's sort of been the case the last couple of years. There isn't really a dominant team that really should be like the Falcons can't beat that team. So I'm very curious if the Falcons are mostly healthy, if Julio's back to, close to whatever he is, 90%. No one's 100% at this point. If Jake's playing fine, I do feel like this team should be competitive, should have an opportunity to win a playoff game, make it to the second round of the playoffs, and maybe even the NFC Championship game. And then, we'll see what happens. You need some breaks. You need some luck. You need to play well. And so I'm looking forward to seeing if this team sort of has that moxie to sort of take their game to the next level come January, because you got to. All right, guys. That was a long one. That's our show for tonight. We appreciate all the mailbag questions. Hopefully we won't be doing 2.5-hour shows, but you guys had a lot of questions this week. If you guys want to send in those questions for next week's show, you can use the hashtag Falcons mailbag. That's an easy way for us to find those. You can tweet at the show's Twitter handle at FalconsPFC. I am at FalcFans. Sky's at Karasik S. You can follow Scott on Blogging Dirty. You can follow me on FalcFans.com. You can subscribe to us on iTunes. I think we're also on Stitcher. You can find our archives on ProFootballCentral.com. Please rate and review us on iTunes. That helps more people find the show. And subscribe to Scar988 on YouTube. Give us a like, thumbs up, all that stuff. So you guys know what to do.